Chapter 2084 Heaven's Path Hammer RT. However, he could feel the needle in the compass spinning ceaselessly, not stopping at all. There were only two reasons behind such a phenomenon. It was either the flow of spiritual energy was too chaotic or that the concentration of spiritual energy was completely equal throughout. Spiritual energy is similar to the flow of water. It's possible for the water within a well to be peaceful and motionless, but as soon as something intrudes its space, ripples would be produced. Zhong Xian thought. Thus, it's a logical impossibility for the spiritual energy to remain unmoved even after I have entered this space. This only goes to show that there's something unnatural about the spiritual energy here. Or else, it could also mean to say that the spiritual energy I am sensing is off. In other words, this confinement formation confounds one's ability to sense spiritual energy as well. Zhong Xian had never seen this confinement formation before, but he had his trove of knowledge with him. He had read many books relating to formations back on the Master-Teacher continent and on the Azure as well, so it wasn't too difficult for him to figure out what was happening before him. I should try sealing my 6 senses. Most confinement formations work through interfering with a cultivator's senses. So, the only way to prevent such interference from occurring was to seal off one's senses. In an instant, Zhong Xian felt as if he had been cast into oblivion. He was unable to see, hear, touch, or smell anything. Even his consciousness seemed to have been plunged into a state of hibernation. This tranquil silence lasted for quite a while, then an image of a slight gap with water dripping from it seemed to surface in Zhong Xian's mind. This gap wasn't too big, allowing only a droplet of water to fall out at a time. It was what that was causing the dripping sound. This is it. With a silent exclamation, Zhong Xian channeled his god's sword intent into his hands before pulling it down furiously upon the slight gap, as though it was a massive sword with a length that could reach the heavens. Hula! It was as if the dark cloth around him had been sliced apart. Zhong Xian opened his eyes, and just as he had expected, his sense of sight had returned to him. Innumerable torches lit up the path ahead of him brightly. The confinement formation is indeed a trap for the heart. Zhong Xian exhaled deeply as he thought in relief. He knew that he had gambled right this time around. The confinement formation confounded not only one's senses but one's soul too. The only way to overcome it was to cast aside one's reliance on one's senses and use one's raw intuition to identify the source of the dripping water. In truth, it had very little to do with one's understanding of formations. As long as one had a resilient state of mind, one should be able to find it eventually and overcome the trial easily. You have overcome the heart oblivion formation within 1/10 of the allocated time, proving that your cultivation and state of mind are fairly decent. You are qualified to proceed on to the 2nd floor, Kongsha's voice echoed in the air. Following that, a stone staircase abruptly descended from the top. Heart oblivion formation? Qualified? What the hell are you up to? Zhong Xian bellowed in bewilderment. He thought that Kongsha would have made preparations for countless semi-divinity realm cultivators to ambush him as soon as he teleported over via the formation, but all the other party did was to put him through a confinement formation, and now, he was telling him he was qualified to move to the 2nd floor? Just what was that fellow up to? However, he was only met with silence. The doubts he harbored remained unanswered. Taking in a deep breath, Zhong Xian made his way up the stone staircase. As soon as he stepped onto the first step, he felt an inviolable pressure crushing down on him, as if attempting to push his soul out of his body. This pressure seems to have originated from the gods. Zhong Xian thought with a frown as he continued moving up the steps. The pressure that crushed down on him left him with a feeling of helplessness in the depths of his heart. It felt as if it was shackling down his bloodline and his life force. It was an instinctive fear, similar to how the knees of an ordinary human would shake in the face of a tiger. This was a feeling that came from the depths of his soul, so there was no way he could avoid it. However, such a trial was nothing to him at all. Wang. The pendant that hung in front of his chest emanated a slight warmth that dissipated the pressure around him. Zhong Xian walked up the stairs without any trouble, and soon, he arrived on the 2nd floor of the palace. Similar to before, he was faced with a spacious hall in front of him. There were 8 paintings positioned in an 8-trigram formation hanging on the walls in front of him. It felt like they were trying to seal something off. Zhongxian took a closer look at the paintings in front of him. The paintings depicted 8 men, each of them wielding a weapon of a different kind. One brandished a sword, one wielded a saber, one gripped onto a steel whip, one carried a metal hammer. As Zhongxian walked toward the painting, he could feel a sharp sensation coming from the paintings. These paintings can't be considered as amazing artistic works, but the person who made the paintings clearly possesses exceptional skills. With a few simple strokes, he was able to infuse the essence of the person he was drawing into the painting. Zhongxian's mastery of painting had already reached 9-star back when he was still at the master-teacher continent. He dared not to claim that his painting skills were on par with Kongshe, but at the very least, he didn't think that he was too lacking in comparison to the latter. The paintings in front of him were drawn simply, such that even a 3-star painter of the master-teacher continent would be able to produce artwork of such quality as well. However, what was powerful about these paintings was how they had precisely captured the power and disposition of these 8 people accurately. This was a feat that not even Zhongxian would be able to achieve. Could this be the drawings of a god? Zhongxian could only imagine a real god to be capable of infusing such amazing power into an ordinary piece of paper through a brush and preserve its might for so many years. Of the 8 paintings, 6 of them were colored. One of them had turned grayish, making it reminiscent of a black and white photograph, whereas the last one had lost half of its color, making it an incomplete piece. It was hard to tell whether the artist had failed to color it in the first place or it had started fading off at some point in time. Zhongxian studied the paintings for a little longer, but he was unable to identify any useful clues from it. At the same time, he didn't hear Kongshe's voice sounding either. So, he walked up to one of the paintings to take a closer look. There was nothing else in this massive hall other than these 8 paintings, so he knew that the key to advancing on from this area lay within the paintings. Most likely, he would have to find a way to uncover their secrets. The painting he walked up toward was one that depicted a brawny man with eyes as large as bells. The man carried 2 metal hammers in his grasp, and his bulging biceps hinted at the great strength he wielded. Zhongxian hesitantly reached out to touch the painting. Who? Following that, he vanished on the spot. When he reappeared once more, he was already standing in the midst of vast, barren lands. It was a completely white world that was devoid of greenery or anything else. It felt almost as if he had descended into an illusory dream. Make your move. Raising his head, Zhongxian saw a brawny man looking at him coldly with 2 metal hammers in his grasp. Did I enter the painting somehow? Zhongxian was stunned. The brawny man standing before him was indeed the same person he had seen in the painting earlier. It seemed like he had been pulled into the painting. Why should I fight with you? Zhongxian asked with a frown as he looked at the ferocious man in front of him. He was still trying to figure out what was happening to him when the other party told him to make a move. If you don't make a move, you'll be trapped here for your entire life, the brawny man harumphed coldly. Paying no heed to whether Zhongxian was willing to fight or not, the brawny man swung his hammers right toward him. Before it even struck, the sheer force behind the hammers made cold sweat from behind Zhongxian's back. To his astonishment, the strength of the brawny man had already exceeded that of the heavenly semi-divinity realm cultivator he had encountered on the ocean of exiled stars. In fact, his strength might even be greater than Kongshe's, a god. In that instant, Zhongxian realized that even if the person standing before him wasn't a god, he was an existence not too far away from that. Zhongxian raised his hand to take out his sword, only to realize that his mental connection with his storage ring had been severed. On top of that, at some point in time, a pair of gigantic metal hammers had appeared in his hands too. He didn't think that his choice of weapons would be limited in the painting too, and his complexion turned awful. He would have been fine if it had been any other weapons, but he had never practiced any battle techniques that required the use of hammers. Before Zhongxian could groan about the situation he was in, the brawny man had already swung a metal hammer right toward his ribcage. The key advantage of fighting with a hammer was the superior torque it provided due to its weight, thus enhancing one's strength significantly. Even though it was impossible for hammer wielders to be as agile as sword practitioners, they were able to restrict the movements of their opponents due to their sheer strength. Zhongxian took a step back and avoided the attack as he thought anxiously, I guess I have no choice but to learn on the spot then. While he had never practiced any ham-related battle techniques or fighting style before, he did gather quite a few battle technique manuals relating to hammers. It was just that he had left them lying on the shelves of the Library of Heaven's Path, never bothering to compile or learn them. But since he was limited to only using hammers in here, he had no choice but to learn it right now. Compile. Zhong Xian gathered all of the books relating to hammers together and assimilated them together, forming a brand new book. He tapped his finger on the newly compiled book, and knowledge immediately flowed into his mind. He was indeed worried about the greyish gaseous substance that grew in his body each time he used the Library of Heaven's Path, but given the desperate situation he was in, he couldn't care that much anymore. He would just have to find a way to resolve them in the future. Otherwise, it was likely that he would die from the crazy brawny man chasing after him with 2 gigantic hammers first. The severing of the heavens only prevented his Library of Heaven's Path from gathering the flaws of other objects, but he was still able to access the Library of Heaven's Path through his consciousness and access the books in them. While dodging the brawny man's attack, he quickly assimilated the Heaven's Path hammer art, turning it into his own. Once he fully comprehended the Heaven's Path hammer art, his aura abruptly changed. In an instant, his aura grew heavy like a mountain, reminiscent of a being that wouldn't waver in the face of anything. Peng! 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 He began clashing hammers with the brawny man, but that didn't seem to be a good idea. Astonishingly, his Heaven's Path hammer art was actually weaker than the brawny man's battle technique. He was still able to stand his ground for the time being as his strength was at least able to match the brawny man's might, but the feedback from each clash made his arm feel a bit number. Fortunately, it seemed like it was the other party had taken on some damage too. The brawny man's attack speed had visibly decreased. But it would still be difficult for me to defeat him before my Jinchi runs out at this rate. I'll have to think of another method. Even though the brawny man was just a person in a painting, the strength he wielded was almost comparable to that of the gods. Zhong Xian was indeed able to stand his ground against the other party after he had achieved a breakthrough to semi-divinity realm, but it still wouldn't be an easy feat for him to triumph over this opponent. If he were to allow things to continue at this pace, even if he were to win the battle, he would still have exhausted himself significantly in the midst of doing so. That would be dangerous, especially considering he didn't know where Kongsha was and what he was up to. The brawny man's hammer art is even more profound than my Heaven's Path hammer art. If I could just infuse his maneuvers into my battle technique too, I should be able to win the battle. Zhong Xian thought despite having practiced the Heaven's Path hammer art, he could tell that his battle techniques were still a little lacking as compared to his opponents. Unless he could learn his opponent's moves, infuse it into his own, and create an even stronger battle technique, or else it would be a difficult battle for him. With such thoughts in mind, Zhong Xian quickly paid closer attention to the brawny man's movements. Hoo. The other party continued pressing on with his offense furiously, whereas Zhong Xian made use of the opportunity to remember every single one of his moves. After trading 100 blows, Zhong Xian's eyebrows shot up in surprise. His hammer art only has 12 basic moves, and everything else aside from that are just transformations and extrapolations from those 12 moves. Chapter 2085 Facing off against Kongsha. Even though the maneuvers of the brawny man looked profound, in truth, all his attacks were made up of 12 basic movements. This was similar to how his Heaven's Path sword art only had a single move, but through its countless possible transformations, he was able to bring out different moves to handle different situations. The crux of a battle technique lay in the intent, not the form. As long as the intent was precise, the attack would eventually connect. Zhong Xian quickly went through the 12 moves in his head, and he could not help but exclaim in astonishment. This hammer art was rather similar to the Ascendant Cloud Sword God formula that he had practiced. The 12 moves had to be executed in a certain order. Compile. Zhong Xian quickly jotted down the movements in his head and compiled them together with the Heaven's Path hammer art. The correct sequence appeared before his eyes, and he quickly moved his hammer in accordance to it. Boom! Barely after making 2 moves, he felt a different aura rising from the depths of his body. He had reached at an epiphany. This is the god's hammer intent. Zhong Xian's lips twitched. He did not think that he would comprehend the god's hammer intent through learning the brawny man's hammer art. Furthermore, just like the god's sword intent that he had learned previously, it had reached the level of a true god. Peng peng. After comprehending the god's hammer intent, the movements of the brawny man before him suddenly became utterly hideous. He noticed all kinds of flaws in the other party's movements, and by exploiting one of them, he was able to subdue the other party within a few strikes. His surroundings abruptly blurred, and when he came to once more, he was standing before the 8 paintings yet again. Catcher! Catcher! Right before his eyes, Zhongxian saw the colored painting of the brawny man losing its vibrance, turning into a gray image. He blinked blankly. So, the reason the paintings lost their color was because someone had successfully challenged them and comprehended the god's battle technique harnessed within? In other words, it said that Kongsha managed to snatch a god character after entering the Hall of Gods, and the founder of the Ascendant Cloudsword Pavilion managed to snatch half a character. Could this be what they mean by it? Of the 8 paintings, there was one that had turned into a black and white portrait, like the painting of the brawny man. At the same time, the painting of the person wielding a sword had lost half of its color. This was in line with what he had heard so far. This also explains why the 12 hammer maneuvers are so similar to the 12 moves of the Ascendant Cloudsword God formula. Zhongxian widened his eyes in realization. Most likely, the founder of the Ascendant Cloudsword Pavilion had fought the person in the painting to a draw, so he had only managed to acquire half of the god character. Even though he had managed to learn all 12 maneuvers, he had not been able to figure out the correct sequence. This resulted in the Ascendant Cloudsword Pavilion being able to produce semi-divinity realm cultivators without overcoming the Azure Bridge, just that the number of successful cases was extremely low, incomparable to that of the Ethereal Hall. Since I have comprehended the 12 maneuvers of the hammer art, doesn't that mean that I have successfully snatched a god character, just like Kongsha did back then? That also meant that the place he was in at the moment was where Kongsha and the founder of the Ascendant Cloudsword Pavilion had barged into back then. It was no wonder no one in the Azure, except for those two, had succeeded in the past several thousand years. It was indeed no easy feat to defeat those people in the paintings. After comprehending the pathos of heavens and raising his cultivation to earthly semi-divinity realm, he could be considered the strongest individual on the Forsaken Continent aside from Kongsha. Despite his strength, he had struggled quite a bit against the brawny man before he was able to achieve victory. From this, it was apparent just how difficult it was a feat to acquire a god character. You have acquired a one god character. You are qualified to proceed. While Zhongxian was deep in thought, the stone staircase descended from above once again, showing a path that led endlessly upward. Heaving a sigh of relief, Zhongxian was just about to step onto the stairs when a thought surfaced in his mind. Since I still have time, why don't I take away the battle techniques harnessed in the other paintings? Even though he seemed to have taken some time to comprehend the hammer art and defeat the brawny man, in truth, it had only been 10 minutes at most. Going by the rate in which the water was dripping down, it had only been a fourth of the total time. Since he had plenty of time to spare, it went without saying that he should acquire a few more god characters. After all, he was not the head of one sect but 4 sects. He could not possibly be biased by imparting the battle technique to only one of the sects, right? With such thoughts in mind, Zhongxian stretched his hand forward to touch the painting depicting a lady holding a sword. Similar to before, his surroundings warped as he was pulled into the painting. The next moment, the lady in the painting immediately charged toward him with the sword she had in hand. In response, Zhongxian released his god's sword intent and began brandishing his sword, too. Within just 3 breaths, the enemy had already collapsed onto the white floor, turning into a splatter of ink. With this, I have managed to put together the Ascendant Cloudsword Pavilion's god character, Zhongxian murmured with a chuckle. Countless generations of disciples in the Ascendant Cloudsword Pavilion had worked themselves to the bone in hopes of completing the half-god, one character their sect possessed. With this, he would have fulfilled their long-time wish. After the painting turned grey, Zhongxian moved on to the one, which depicted an old man executing a battle technique. Without any hesitation, he reached out and touched the painting. 5 minutes later, He reappeared in the spacious hall, and the painting of the old man had turned grey. With his prior experience, he knew what he had to do as soon as he entered the painting. As a result, he was much faster than the first time. His efficiency only continued to rise for the remaining 4 paintings. It took him less than 15 minutes in order to clear all of them. Only then did he finally place his foot on the stone staircase and begin heading toward the 3rd floor. The 3rd floor was extremely spacious as well. The surroundings were well lit, and there were no paintings nor formations in sight. If there was one word to describe the area, it would be empty. Halting his footsteps, Zhongxian scanned his surroundings and shouted, "Kongsha, isn't it about time for you to make an appearance?" Since the other party had set up all of this and baited him in, it should finally be time for the other party to appear. Just as he had expected, right after he said those words, a tall figure appeared before his eyes. It was none other than Kongsha. Glaring at Kongsha with narrowed eyes, Zhongxian took out his Tongshang sword and gripped its handle tightly. This was the man who had attempted to take his life multiple times in order to acquire his library of Heaven's Path. Since this man dared appear before him, he would have to return the favor. However, Zhongxian quickly noticed that something was amiss. "What's wrong? Do you not dare face me with your main body?" He realized that the other party was just a sliver of his will. It was not the main body at all. Could it be that Kongsha knew that he had already reached the semi-divinity realm and feared that he was not a match for him anymore? Paying no heed to Zhongxian's provocation, Kongsha placed his hands behind his back and spoke calmly. "It's formidable that you were able to clear 7 paintings on your own. That being said, you'll still have to defeat me in order to obtain the aura of divinity and earn the right to become a real god. You want to have a fight?" Seeing that Kongsha was not escaping, Zhongxian raised his Tongshang sword and slashed it furiously. He knew that his opponent would be powerful, so he used the god's sword intent right from the start. "I won't take advantage of you either." Kongsha chuckled softly. He suppressed his heavenly semi-divinity realm cultivation down to earthly semi-divinity realm, the same level as Zhongxian. With a flick of his finger, he took out a sword. It was hard to tell what tier it was, but it emanated an imposing chill. With a swift movement, he charged right up to Zhongxian. Tzz. His sword intent burst forth as though a vigorous dragon. Formidable. Just these few moves were enough to tell Zhongxian that Kongsha was a true expert. Even though what he was facing was just a sliver of Kongsha's will, the latter's comprehension of swordsmanship was actually beneath his at all. On the contrary, it might even have surpassed his. Despite being in the same cultivation realm, he was not able to claim an advantageous position. "How did you become so powerful?" Zhongxian muttered in disbelief. Back then, Kongsha had barely been able to fight on par with his clone. However, he was already stronger than his clone at the moment, and he had comprehended so many gods' battle techniques too. Under normal circumstances, he should have been able to defeat the other parties will easily. He did not expect that he would face such a tough battle. He's also using a type of Heaven's Path sword art as well. Kongsha's swordplay was also aligned with the world around him. Despite its simplicity, the might that it harnessed was not one to look down upon. Even though the two of them were using Heaven's Path sword arts, the natures of their swordsmanship were vastly different from one another. Zhongxian's swordsmanship was focused on exploiting the flaws of others, but Kongsha's swordsmanship was able to influence his opponent's swordplay, forcing it to obey his order. It felt as if his sword was dancing to Kongsha's tune instead. How was he supposed to win in such a battle? Is this the ability of Heaven's order? Zhongxian felt his heart turning cold. He had heard Kongsha speaking about his ability before, but the latter did not use it while he was fighting with his clone, so he had not paid it any heed. It was only at this moment that he realized just how frightening that ability was. It was strikingly similar to Kong Shiyao's bloodline ability, Word of Law. Even if he managed to find a flaw to exploit, it would be meaningless when his sword was bending to Kongsha's will. This had already gone past the level of swordsmanship to the laws of the world. Through changing the order of the world, Kongsha was able to maintain an absolute dominion around him, and nothing was able to faze him. This was a battle that could not be won. "There's no way I could lose to an opponent who is at the same level as me," Zhongxian bellowed lividly. Other than his clone, he had never lost to anyone in the same cultivation realm as him. The person before him was just a sliver of will from Kongsha, so how could he possibly lose? There was no way he would allow it. Thus, Zhongxian began changing his attacking pattern. While executing his swordsmanship with his right hand, he began launching battle techniques one after another with his left. It was as if he had split into two people in an instant, one specializing in swordsmanship and the other specializing in battle techniques. Furthermore, both attacks were infused with the god's intent. With such might, he was more than qualified to start his own sect and rule over the entire Forsaken continent. Just like that, his fighting prowess doubled. Not bad. Kongsha's will nodded with an approving smile. Following Zhongxian's example, he began to execute swordsmanship with his right hand and battle techniques with his left as well. With this, he managed to defend against Zhongxian's offense without any trouble. Seeing this sight, Zhongxian felt goosebumps rising all over him. Was this Kongsha's true strength? Was the only reason his clone had been able to defeat Kongsha back then because the latter had not fully recovered his strength yet? Peng peng peng. After trading over a dozen blows, Zhongxian felt that he would eventually fall in defeat. He was still managing to stand his ground, but slowly, he could feel the tides of the battle moving toward Kongsha's side, and this left him feeling deeply anxious. So, with a narrowed gaze, a vicious glint flashed across his eyes. It seems like I can only try out my new technique on him. Chapter 2086. A heart of intertwined threads, filed with thousands and thousands of knots. Pathos of heavens. As much as it was a cultivation technique, it was a battle technique as well. It was a conceptualization that he had come up with through his epiphany, so it was not too difficult for him to materialize it into a battle technique. Sentimental humans were born from the indifferent heavens. The heavens would have long withered if they had feelings. As a conceptualization arose in Zhongxian's head, Kongsha's flawless swordsmanship began to take on another form right before his eyes. Where Kongsha's sword passed, a grey streak would be left in its wake. These grey streaks gradually interweaved with one another to form something reminiscent of a net. This was the power that had limited his movements, placing him at a disadvantageous position throughout the battle. Heaven's order. Even though these grey streaks are scattered chaotically, they still observe a certain kind of pattern and law. It's almost like weaving together a heaven's net. It isn't tight, but once it bites, it will never let go, Zhongxian analyzed with a nonchalant expression on his face. He did not have too deep an understanding of heaven's order previously, and it was through his conceptualization that he was able to see through the laws behind Kongsha's swordsmanship. Resonance, that was the crux of Kongsha's swordsmanship. It was also a property that all beings in the world possessed, an intrinsic law of nature. As long as two objects were moving in at the resonant frequency to one another, even the toughest object in the world could easily be destroyed. To be honest, Zhongxian had no idea whether the Heaven's Order swordsmanship was flawless. However, through forcing his opponent to obey his law, he was able to slowly bring his opponent to the same frequency as him and finally defeat him. To use a crass metaphor from his previous life, it was similar to how an idiot would drag you down to their level and beat you with experience. Zhongxian came to a realization. The Heaven's Order swordsmanship is able to weave together an illusory net that compels the opponent to obey its rules. If I use swordsmanship that can unravel his rules, I'll be able to overcome him. With a light chuckle, he channeled his god's sword intent into the Tongzhang sword and swiftly formed a massive net that was similar yet dissimilar to Kongsha's net. A heart of intertwined threads, filled with thousands and thousands of knot. A poem suddenly surfaced in Zhongxian's mind. Just like that, the very first sword art of Pathos of Heavens had been created. With a flick of Zhongxian's Tongzhang sword, Kongsha's swordsmanship suddenly seemed to freeze in place. The intricate net that he had been weaving earlier overlapped with the one that Zhongxian had created, causing it to intersect messily with one another. As a result, he was unable to quickly struggle free. With the messing up of the order that he had created, Kongsha lost control over his surroundings. He was no longer able to influence Zhongxian with his rules. With this, Zhongxian had finally been freed. He immediately stepped forward to launch a follow-up attack so as to crush Kongsha's will, but the next moment, the the latter took a step back and retreated from the sphere of battle. The fact that you were able to find the flaws in my swordsmanship and destroy my order within such a short period of time shows that you are a deeply talented and intelligent individual. You are qualified to become a god. Kongsha chuckled as he stroked his beard. We haven't finished our battle yet. Zhongxian looked at Kongsha with eyes narrowed with doubt. Despite having comprehended such a powerful sword art, Kongsha was still able to retreat so easily without sustaining the slightest injury. This showed that he had not used his full strength. If the battle went on, there was no guarantee that he would have emerged victorious. Since that was the case, why did Kongsha back out of the battle? Victory and defeat are inconsequential here. My only goal here is to test the eligible challengers on behalf of the gods. You were able to overcome the Heart Oblivion formation within 1/10 of the time and comprehend 7 gods' intents alone. On top of that, you were able to see through the opening in my swordsmanship and create a new sword art to deal with it on the spot. Your talents are truly unrivaled, Kongsha remarked calmly. Test. Challenges. Zhongxian was confused by what was going on. Was Kongsha not trying to kill him so that he could obtain his library of Heaven's Path? Why was he acting in such a manner? It was as if the will before him was completely different from the person whom he had met previously. Perplexed, Zhongxian was just about to voice the doubts in his heart when Kongsha suddenly said, "If I'm not mistaken, you have inherited the heaven's imperfections, right?" Those words immediately placed Zhongxian on guard. He had been wondering if the will before him was really a different person from before when the latter suddenly spoke of the heaven's imperfections. It seemed like he was finally revealing his true self. Just as I thought. The Hall of Gods has always held the strong in high esteem, so successful challengers are allowed to leave their will behind to test the next challenger. You should leave your will here so that you can test the challengers of the next generation, Kongsha said with a smile. As he said those words, his silhouette began to flicker. Zhongxian had seen this situation many times before. Ultimately, a will was just a transient existence in this world. After accomplishing its mission, it would dissipate. While he was on the master-teacher continent, every time he tried to ask Kongsha about the innate fetal poison, the latter would simply dissipate all of a sudden. As for the aura of divinity, the palace will naturally bestow it upon you once you leave the premises. Then, with a silent pop, Kongsha's will dissipated into the surroundings. Seeing this, Zhongxian frowned doubtfully. Could it be that there's really a real Kongsha and fake Kongsha? The Kongsha whom he had just met earlier was similar to all those he had met back on the master-teacher continent. There was a hint of benevolence in the depths of his eyes, and it felt like he was someone who would shelter the world from all storms. This was vastly different from that one who had saved him from the Hall of Gods. Could it be that the will that had just dissipated came from the real Kongsha? Forget it. Whether that Kongsha is a good person or a bad person, if I can really obtain the aura of divinity and successfully become a god, nothing will be a problem anymore. He left his will on the 3rd floor before heading down the stone staircase. The fact that the palace allowed him to leave his will there meant that he had already gained its approval. When he returned to the entrance that he had entered from, the gates had already appeared once more. He saw his clone standing beyond the doorsill, waiting patiently for his return. Heaving a sigh of relief, Zhongxian walked over to his clone's side before turning around to take another look at the gigantic palace right before his eyes. The palace was still standing above the cradle of wind currents. All of a sudden, a golden flow shot out from the cradle and rose in between the 2 pillars of the palace. This golden flow emanated a brilliant glow. It exerted a heavy pressure right upon one's soul. Is this the aura of divinity? It seemed like Kongsha had not lied to him. This golden flow felt as heavy as the mercury-like spiritual energy when he first encountered it back on the master-teacher continent. He had a feeling that his meridians would rupture if he absorbed it recklessly. Most likely, this was the power that only real gods were worthy of harnessing. In other words, if he absorbed the aura of divinity before him, there was a good chance that he could reach the realm of the gods. That would put him on a level that no one on the Forsaken Continent could match. With eyes glowing with excitement, he leaped into the air as he quickly headed toward the golden flow. But before he could reach his destination, A burst of sword chi abruptly sliced through his pathway. It severed the space, creating a dimension rift between Zhongxian and the golden flow. Astonished, Zhongxian hurriedly halted his movements. "You have my deepest thanks. I knew that you would be able to do it, and you sure didn't disappoint." Following that, a mirror suddenly appeared in midair. A hand crept out from the surface of the mirror and grabbed the golden flow between its fingers. "Who?" Then, the entire golden flow was absorbed into a jade bottle and vanished. Following which, the figure turned around. It was none other than Kongsha. Zhongxian tightened his fists in anger. "You aren't Kongsha. Who in the world are you?" Zhongxian asked with narrowed eyes. He had thought it was weird how the other party had never appeared even though there were so many ideal opportunities for him to strike. It turned out that he had been hiding in the void all along, waiting for the moment that he obtained the aura of divinity to snatch it from her. However, when Zhongxian first arrived in the area, he had made sure to examine his surroundings carefully, and he did not notice any folded space or the like. Just where in the world did the other party appear from, and how did he manage to traverse space to get there? More importantly, if the will that he had encountered in the palace was real, it was likely that the person standing before him was a fake. That would explain why the other party was unaware of the details regarding Shenjiang City's teleportation portal, as well as why the will that he had encountered in the palace seemed to be unsure about the existence of the heaven's imperfections. "Who else can I be if not Kongsha?" The face of the person in the air warped in anger. "I am him. I have always been him. Hula." Amid his furious rage, he thrust his palm downward. The air currents had always been chaotic in the area. That palm strike caused more and more dimension rifts to appear all around, leaving Zhongxian not daring to advance any further. He has indeed gotten much stronger. Zhongxian narrowed his eyes. The fact that the other party was able to shatter space so easily showed that he was much stronger compared to the time he was facing his clone. Nevertheless, there was no hint of heaven's order in his palm strike, and the battle technique that he used did not harness the essence of the world. That meant that he was not using a heaven's path battle technique. Furthermore, as powerful as his attack was, it was not to the extent where it was able to influence the laws around him. There's no doubt about it, he's indeed a fake. Since Kongsha possessed a fragment of the heavens as well, he was naturally able to use heaven's path battle techniques. He had wondered about that previously, too, but he had not been too certain as he had never seen anyone aside from him using heaven's path battle techniques. As such, he had mistaken the other party's attacks to have reached the level of heaven's path battle techniques previously. However, after witnessing what Kongsha's will was capable of, it was apparent that the attacks of the person before him were lacking. This only pointed to a single possibility. Even though he refused to admit to it, the person standing before him was indeed a fake. "Return the aura of divinity to me." Zhongxian knew that this was not a good time for his mind to be wandering. As he brandished the Tongzhang sword, he beckoned his clone to move alongside him. With a barrage of swift slashes, he formed a net of sword chi around the fake Kongsha. A heart of intertwined thread. He executed the sword art that he had just comprehended without any hesitation. He knew that he was facing a difficult opponent, such that the god's sword intent that he had comprehended would not be much use in the battle. Thus, he used the strongest move he knew of from the very start of the battle. Amazing swordsmanship. "However, I won't be fighting with you today. Once I become a god myself, your library will become mine. No one in this world will be able to stop me." Kongsha burst into laughter as he leaped back into the mirror and vanished from view. T. Zhongxian's face turned livid. Chapter 2087 Meeting Palace Master Du once more. It was no wonder this fellow had not made a move since disappearing back then. Zhongxian had thought that the other party was finding a way to recover his full strength, but who could have known that the other party's goal was to bide his time so that he could acquire the aura of divinity. In fact, the other party might even have known that he would not be able to obtain the Library of Heaven's Path back then, so he intentionally set this scheme up to bait him. But why did that fellow not challenge the palace on his own? Was it because he was unable to challenge it or because he was unable to clear it? Considering how the will on the third floor had been left behind by the real Kongsha, Perhaps the latter might have used some means to prevent the fake Kongsha from entering, similar to how his clone was unable to enter the palace. Wait a moment, could it be that? A thought surfaced in Zhongxian's mind as his gaze darted toward his clone, who was standing with a smug smile on his face. His clone did not seem to be embarrassed because the palace had rejected his entry. If anything, he only seemed disappointed that he had not been able to show off. Zhongxian pondered for a moment before retracting his gaze. It isn't the time for me to be thinking about this right now. I can't let that fellow escape. Once he absorbs the aura of divinity and reaches the level of the gods, I won't stand a chance against him. He could not help but be worried about the current situation. In the first place, the fake Kongsha was no weaker than him. If the other party really made a breakthrough, he would be doomed no matter how many semi-divinity realm cultivators he could rally to his side. The only reason the fake Kongsha needed to lie low was because he was unable to find the catalyst that he needed to make a breakthrough. However, the situation was different now that he had acquired the aura of divinity. No matter what, he had to stop the other party. It was just that, the other party had already run away. Even if there was something he could do, he had to find a way to get out of there first. With the altar destroyed, he no longer had a way to return to the Forsaken Continent. If he had obtained the aura of divinity earlier, he would have been able to reach the level of the gods. If so, he could have just returned by breaking apart space. But now his route had been completely destroyed. The only reason Kongsha was able to traverse through space was because of the Paragon Black Mirror and the evanescent boots, Zhongxian thought as he recalled what had happened earlier. Even though the evanescent boots were not a semi-divinity artifact, they granted their wearer the special ability to traverse through space. When used together with the Paragon Black Mirror, Kongsha was able to move at speeds that even Zhongxian was unable to do anything about. This was not a good situation. It meant that if Kongsha attempted to harm his direct disciples, there was not much that he could do. Even though Zhongxian felt a little anxious inside, he was still able to keep a rational head. He quickly ran through everything that had happened over the last few days to figure out the current situation. Kongsha snatched the god character from here, and the founder of the Ascendant Cloudsword Pavilion took half a character away with him. The fact that there are traces of that here means that the palace is likely the real Hall of Gods. In turn, that also means that the place I entered back then was a fake. Previously, he had thought that the place where he had been assaulted by the 10 semi-divinity realm cultivators was the real Hall of Gods, but from the current looks of it, he had been misled. Most likely, it was a place that the fake Kongsha had specially prepared in order to corner him. That might even have been the real headquarters of the Ethereal Hall. Thinking back, it was weird how there had been no one to be seen in the headquarters of the Ethereal Hall when he arrived back then. Furthermore, the entire area was even planted with explosive formations. Who in their right mind would plant explosives in their headquarters, as if expecting that it would be breached by an enemy? That did not make sense at all. It was likely that the Azure Bridge was linked to the palace that he had been to earlier, the real Hall of Gods, several thousand years ago. Otherwise, how did the real Kongsha and the founder of the Ascendant Cloudsword Pavilion get there and snatch the god character? How did they return to the Azure and establish their own sects as powerhouses of the Forsaken Continent? If this is the real Hall of Gods, it should be connected to the Azure Bridge too, right? Zhongxian began examining his surroundings carefully with his eye of insight. The area where the altar had been destroyed was completely empty, as if it had been floating in the midst of a void. The surroundings were also dark, and there was not the slightest sign of life to be seen. There was no sign of the Azure Bridge at all. Was he wrong? Zhongxian circled the palace, but there was still no passageway to be seen. It was as if this palace existed in the midst of a void. Just as he was feeling incredibly helpless, his eyes suddenly fell upon the 2 pillars that seemed to pin the palace in place. He had seen them when he first arrived. They seemed to pierce endlessly through the void, and he had also been unable to analyze what material they were made of. All he was able to conclude was that they were at least semi-divinity artifacts, such that he would be unable to destroy them with his current strength. Could that be the real Azure Bridge? He had already checked the surroundings multiple times, but there was nothing that came close to resembling the Azure Bridge. Perhaps those 2 pillars were the key. Let me take a look. Zhongxian quickly threw the clone into his storage ring before leaping onto the palace. Grabbing tightly onto one of the pillars, he began climbing upward. He had no idea how tall the pillar was, but he kept climbing on, till the palace behind became as small as a dot. He climbed for 4 whole hours before he finally broke through an atmosphere. A ray of light suddenly appeared at the end of the dark void. Right after, Zhongxian felt his surroundings disorientating. He had been climbing up a moment ago, but all of a sudden, he was hugging onto the pillar to prevent himself from falling downward. He had encountered this situation back when he was getting on top of the Azure Bridge from the heaven anchoring boulder. He had stepped from one spatial dimension into another, resulting in the abrupt change in his center of gravity. He felt like he had been climbing upward all along, which suggested that the Hall of Gods had been at the bottom. However, from his current point of view, it would seem like the Hall of Gods was actually above him. He quickly climbed back up the Azure Bridge before looking around him. He noticed that there was a majestic hall right beneath him. Isn't that the fake Hall of Gods? Zhongxian recognized it with a single glance. It was where he had been assaulted by 10 semi-divinity realm experts simultaneously, only to be saved by the fake Kongsha. So, these two places are actually linked to one another. Zhongxian came to a realization. The 2 pillars of the palace were linked to the very top of the fake Hall of Gods. He thought that it was only for aesthetic purpose back then, but it turned out that the fake Hall of Gods was actually not the endpoint. If he had traveled a little further back then, he would have been able to enter the real Hall of Gods. Kongsha should have returned here. Zhongxian's eyes lit up, and he quickly concealed his aura before heading into the fake Hall of Gods. If his guess was not wrong, those semi-divinity realm experts that he had encountered back then were all the fake Kongsha's subordinates. In other words, the fake Hall of Gods was actually the other party's core base. It was likely that the fake Kongsha would head there to attempt a breakthrough after obtaining the aura of divinity. Zhongxian knew that he had to find a way to steal the aura of divinity. As long as he could achieve a breakthrough, the enemy would pose no threat to him at all. He silently crept alongside the walls of the fake Hall of Gods and entered it. Perhaps they thought that no one could reach there or that no one would dare barge in, but there were no sentries standing on guard. Zhongxian stealthily explored the area. The place was truly massive. Zhongxian swiftly maneuvered around the areas to find where Kongsha was hiding when he suddenly heard 2 sets of footsteps. They chatted with one another as they walked over. Our Hall Master has passed down orders for us to put that person to death. As there were no outsiders in the area, there was no need for them to worry about their secrets leaking out. Put that person to death. That's right. We needed her previously for her chance to activate the altar and conduct the ritual, but now, as long as our Hall Master successfully becomes a god, he will be able to do anything even without the altar. It doesn't matter whether she's alive or not. Indeed. We'll surely be handsomely rewarded once our Hall Master becomes a god. As long as we listen to him obediently, we might even have a chance to reach that level, too. Isn't that so? Well, let's hurry up and do it. The discussion seemed to be slowly drifting further and further away. Activate the altar and conduct the ritual? Are they referring to Palace Master Du? Zhongxian frowned. Thinking back, the last time he had seen Du Qingyuan was also in this hall. It seemed like she was still there. However, it was apparent that she was in a precarious position. I should first save her before doing anything else, Zhongxian thought with narrowed eyes. With a set of swift maneuvers, he appeared before the duo in an instant and swung his Tongshang sword. A cold glint flashed across the room. Puha! Puha! The 2 semi-divinity realm experts collapsed to the floor before they could even react. Zhongxian immediately stowed their corpses into his storage ring. Back when he was still at the heavenly high immortal realm, he had been able to slay ordinary semi-divinity realm cultivators with a single slash. Since he had achieved a breakthrough and comprehended the complete god's sword intent, assassinating opponents of such tiers no longer posed a challenge to him. He was able to do it without even causing the slightest disturbance in the surrounding spiritual energy. After getting rid of those 2, he morphed his appearance into one of them and donned his clothes. With this, his disguise was perfect. So, he began making his way forward. Even though the place was extremely spacious, There were not many rooms around. He was able to determine where Du Qingyuan was kept just by where those two semi-divinity realm cultivators had been heading. Soon, he arrived before a locked chamber. With a flick of his wrist, he took out a key that he had looted from those two and opened the door without any trouble. In there, he saw a middle-aged lady seated at the center of the room. Her hands and legs were tightly cuffed, limiting her movements. Her hair was unkempt, and there was a withered look on her face. The aura she emanated was extremely weak as well. It seemed like she was severely injured. Upon his entry, Du Qingyuan looked over with clear eyes. It seemed like she had shaken out of Kongsha's control. "Has he ordered you to kill me?" Du Qingyuan asked with an expressionless look on her face. She had managed to guess what was awaiting her. Instead of answering the question, Zhongxian shut the doors tightly before slowly walking over. "Since he was willing to destroy the altar, it means that my existence is of no value to him anymore." Du Qingyuan harumphed coldly. The altar was an artifact that she had assimilated, so naturally, she was able to sense its destruction. He knew that the reason Kongsha had captured her was to make use of her altar, so the only reason she could think of for Kongsha allowing the altar to be destroyed was that he had found a way to achieve his goals even without the altar. A pawn who had lost its value was bound to be disposed of. "I never thought that I would meet my end like this." Du Qingyuan glanced upward with a slight hint of despair in her eyes. She could not imagine what would become of Starchaser Palace without her. Her direct disciple was not ready to succeed her as the new palace master, and even though Jiang Yarrow had reached the semi-divinity realm, her strength was lacking to the other veterans. They were in difficult times. The Hall of Gods was colluding with the Ethereal Hall, and it was likely that they would soon root out the 6 sects so that they could establish their dominance on the Forsaken Continent. Any hint of weakness at this moment would be fatal. It was for this reason that she had entrusted her hopes to an unknown factor, Zhongxian. She hoped that the young man who had created so many miracles would protect Starchaser Palace even in her absence. But ultimately, she did not know if she had made the correct decision. Would Zhongxian even be willing to protect Starchaser Palace? She hated how she was helpless, and it pained her to think of the possible tragedies that could happen to Starchaser Palace in her absence. She closed her eyes tightly for a brief moment before opening them once more. Rising to her feet, she tidied up her clothes and smoothed out the creases. After that, she began to comb her hair with her fingers before pinning it in place with a hairpin. Then, she looked at the person who had just entered the room and said, "Even if I have to die, I will die a dignified death." As she waited for the other party to make his move, a calm voice suddenly echoed in the air. "It's the second time we've met, isn't it, Palace Master Du?" Right before her eyes, the appearance of the person before her began to morph into that of a young man in his early 20s. Zhongxian. Du Qingyuan's body stiffened up. Slowly, it started to tremble in agitation. Chapter 2088 The Ethereal Hall Headquarters. It was through the mouth of the spirit god that she first heard about this young man. Back then, she had found it extremely bizarre. How could a young lad from a lower world possibly be qualified to gain the spirit god's fancy and even become her lover? Soon after, she received an audience from Sovereign Chen Yong, so she descended an avatar of herself to the lower world. It was then that she met the young man for the first time. She did not see anything impressive about the young man, but the decision he made pleased her. So, she brought Wu Chen up to the Azure and treated him. Not too long later, she received news that Zhongxian had arrived on the Forsaken Continent, and within just a few days, he had already become the sect leader of the Ascendant Cloudsword Pavilion. Words could not explain how astounded she was by that news. She began to realize why the young man was able to catch the spirit god's sight. So, she specially made a trip over to the Ascendant Cloudsword Pavilion to meet him, but he had already left the sect. She left Wu Chen with the Ascendant Cloudsword Pavilion before returning to the sect alone. Shortly after, the warriors of the Hall of Gods barged into Starchaser Palace and demanded that she hand over the altar. Knowing that she would not be able to deal with them alone, she wrote her will before running away with the altar. Yet, who would have thought that Hall Master Kong would still end up being able to find her? Eventually, she was captured and imprisoned. She thought that she would meet her end. Not even in her wildest dreams did she expect to see Zhongxian there, disguised as one of the semi-divinity realm cultivators. With a smile on his lips, the young man took out a sword and said, "Palace Master Du, I'll have to trouble you to take a step back." Du Qingyuan knew that it was no time for them to be reminiscing about the past and catching up with one another, so she took a step back and raised her arms. Taking a deep breath, the young man swung his sword. Ding 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 ding. With 4 metallic clangs, the cuffs binding her wrists and ankles fell to the ground. Even though the cuffs were not semi-divinity artifacts, the fact that they were able to bind a semi-divinity realm cultivator meant that they possessed resilience comparable to one. Yet, Zhongxian was able to sever them easily with his current strength. After severing the chains, the young man passed a jade bottle over to her. "Drink this." Du Qingyuan quickly uncorked the jade bottle and gulped down whatever was inside. A moment later, her eyes widened in astonishment. She knew how severe her injuries were. Given that she was already reaching the limits of her lifespan, she thought that her cultivation was already crippled for good. She did not think that she had enough vitality in her to make a full recovery. Yet, a mere bottle of water had cured all of her injuries, nursing her back to full health. She looked at Zhongxian in astonishment, but the latter shook his head and said, "There's no time to explain. Come with me." "All right." Du Qingyuan nodded. She quickly drove her zhenqi and cleansed her body of grime and dirt, thus reverting to her usual appearance as a graceful palace master. Heaving a sigh of relief, she quickly followed behind Zhongxian. On the other hand, Zhongxian could not help but shake his head helplessly when he saw how Du Qingyuan was concerned about her appearance despite the dire situation they were in. Clicking his tongue, he pushed the door open and walked out. There was no one outside. Having saved Du Qingyuan, he could not be bothered to keep up his disguise. It was not as if anyone there, except for Kongshe, could defeat him anyway. So, he continued inward. "The exit is over there," the perplexed Du Qingyuan remarked with a frown. The deeper they headed in, the greater the danger they would face. Zhongxian might be unaware of Hall Master Kong's true strength, but she knew just how insanely powerful that man was. In terms of fighting prowess, he might even be on par with the gods. Not only so, he also had plenty of semi-divinity realm experts under his command. They would be doomed once they were made aware of his intrusion. "I'm not planning on leaving yet. I'm here for Kongshe," Zhongxian explained with a smile. This time, he had his clone to fight alongside him. On top of that, he had also comprehended the pathos of heavens and a heart of intertwined threads. As long as Kongshe had not reached the level of a god, the chances of them winning were extremely high. The only reason he had chosen to disguise himself was out of fear that it might incite panic, leading to the enemies to quickly get rid of Du Qingyuan or use her as hostage. Since Du Qingyuan had been saved, there was nothing to hold him back anymore. "Kongshe. You are referring to Hall Master Kong, right?" Du Qingyuan was stunned. "We won't be able to take him on with just the two of us. We'll need to gather Han Zhenqiu and the others." Before she could finish her piece, footsteps suddenly sounded ahead of them. A doubtful voice demanded, "Who are you? Wait, aren't you Du Qingyuan? How did you get out?" "Men." That voice echoed loudly throughout the entire hall. "Su su su." In an instant, numerous figures appeared all around the corridor, sealing off all paths of escape. 13 semi-divinities. Du Qingyuan trembled in horror. They would have been perfectly fine if they had snuck away earlier, but this fellow simply wanted to look for Hall Master Kong. Now that they were surrounded by 13 semi-divinities who were no weaker than her, there was no way they would be able to get away unscathed anymore. She felt as if the hope that had appeared before her just a moment ago had been shattered, plunging her deeper into the abyss of despair. "Spirit God, you didn't tell me that the person you like is actually so unreliable. Oh, aren't you sect leader Zhong? Since you have paid a visit to our ethereal hall, it would be rude for us not to offer you our warmest welcome, right?" A semi-divinity realm cultivator amid the crowd recognized Zhongxian, and his words sparked flames of greed in the eyes of the others. All of them knew how highly their hall master valued Zhongxian. If they could capture him, they would surely be handsomely rewarded for their service. Voila! With overwhelming killing intent lingering in the air, the semi-divinities drew their weapons. Du Qingyuan felt goosebumps rising all over her body. She silently inched toward Zhongxian and said, "I'll only be able to deal with 2 of them at most with my current strength. I have been observing them carefully, and I think I can try opening a path for you to escape by attacking those 3 right ahead of me. So, pay careful attention and make your escape as soon as you see an opening, all right?" Only her physical wounds had healed so far. Her soul had not fully recovered yet, and her greatest trump card, the altar, had been destroyed. It was already formidable that she could keep 2 semi-divinity realm cultivators of the Hall of Gods in check given her current strength. Escape. I am very grateful that you are willing to brave through the danger to rescue me, Du Qingyuan said with a determined glint in her eyes, but my lifespan is already coming to an end. If only one of us can make it out of here alive, it should be you. I'll be entrusting the future of Starchaser Palace and the Forsaken Continent to you. There's no need for that. Zhongxian chuckled a little upon seeing Du Qingyuan's response. Seeing how the 2 of them were relaxed enough to chat with one another, the leader of the group bellowed, "Everyone, let's take them down together. Our Hall Master will surely be delighted if he sees that we have managed to capture Zhongxian when he returns." Hula. Unable to hold back their anxiety any longer, the crowd made their move. Su 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 su. Surges of energy gushed in from the surroundings, forming a sturdy cage around Zhongxian and Du Qingyuan. "Zhongxian, run away!" Du Qingyuan exclaimed. She did not think that they would actually be so well trained in collaborative formations. Knowing that they would be trapped if she waited any longer, she immediately dashed forward to make her move. However, the sight before her suddenly blurred, and the energy cage around them abruptly dissipated. Before she knew it, Zhongxian was already standing right before the leader of the pack, his hand clutching onto the latter's neck tightly. Looking at the leader with a frighteningly nonchalant expression on his face, he asked, "Where is Hallmaster Kong?" "He has gone out," the leader replied with a quivering voice. He was caught completely off guard by how fast Zhongxian was, such that his entire body was still trembling from shock. "He isn't here." Zhongxian frowned. He had thought that Kong Shi would try to assimilate the aura of divinity there. If the other party was not there, where else could he be? This was not good at all. If Kong Shi successfully became a god, the consequences would be dire. They would really have no means to deal with him then. "I don't believe you," Zhongxian remarked coldly. He squeezed his fingers lightly, crushing the leader's windpipe. There was a short moment of silence before he sighed with a frown. Kong Shi really isn't here." There was no way he could take the enemy's words at face value, so he had conducted a soul search as well. But just as the other party had said, Hall Master Kong did not return after heading out. While Zhongxian was shaking his head in displeasure, Du Qingyuan was looking upon the sight before her with an incredulous expression. It was just a moment ago that she thought they were goners, but in the blink of an eye, her comrade had already taken down the leader of the pack. What was even eerier to her was how no one in the crowd rushed over to help their own ally. It was as if they were frozen in place. Du Qingyuan pointed to the other 12 semi-divinities around her and murmured, They were all standing on the spot, not moving an inch. However, she could see fear deeply reflected in their eyes, as if they were looking at something that terrified them to their souls. "What's wrong?" Zhongxian tossed aside the leader's body before taking out a handkerchief to wipe his hands. "Why aren't they moving?" Du Qingyuan asked warily. "They're dead. Dead men aren't able to move," Zhongxian replied impassively, as if he was just pointing out a fact. He had been wondering what Du Qingyuan was so shocked about, but it turned out to just be that. Since those men had decided to assault them, there was no need for him to show mercy to them. Thus, he had used a heart of intertwining threads to slit their throats, killing all 12 of them in an instant. He had only chosen to spare the leader temporarily in order to question him. "They're dead." Du Qingyuan was stunned. She carefully walked up to one of the semi-divinities and pushed his body carefully. Putong. The semi-divinity realm cultivator's body fell flat on the floor, causing the ground to tremble a little. That, in turn, caused the bodies of the remaining 11 semi-divinities to fall to the ground as well. Du Qingyuan rubbed her eyes vigorously, wondering if she had seen incorrectly. When did he make a move? How did he make a move? 413 semi-divinities to be killed in an instant. How was this even possible? Was it really true that this fellow had only arrived on the Forsaken Continent a month ago? Was it possible for someone to become so powerful within such a short period of time? Du Qingyuan felt a little stifled inside. To think that there was a period of time where she had thought that this young man was not worthy of the spirit god. This was probably the first time in the history of the Forsaken Continent that a person had managed to cultivate from ancient sage 4 Dan to become an unrivaled existence among semi-divinities within just a single month. If he were given another month, would he be able to become as powerful as the spirit god? She suddenly had a feeling that everyone else had only been crawling along in their cultivation, whereas the young man was sprinting ahead. "Hold on for a moment," the young man suddenly said. With a smile on his face, he walked up to each and every one of the corpses and took their storage rings. After that, with a wave of his hand, he chucked all their corpses into his storage ring. Not too bad. They seem to have plenty of pills with them. I guess those from the ethereal hall are pretty wealthy after all, Zhongxian commented with a satisfied nod. He had wondered where he could find the remaining 70 premier immortal pills required for him to achieve a breakthrough, but to his delight, he managed to gather all of them with several dozen extra after slaying 15 semi-divinities. As expected of the ethereal hall, since Hall Master Kong isn't around, it's unlikely we'll face any danger here. Wait here for a moment, I'll swiftly take a look around, Zhongxian said before vanishing from sight. Take a look around. What does he want to look at? Du Qingyuan was left standing on the spot, confused. Paying no heed to the Du Qingyuan, Zhongxian headed to the innermost room along the corridors. Through his earlier soul search, he had been able to confirm that he was in the headquarters of the ethereal hall. Since this was the headquarters, there was no doubt that there were plenty of treasures lying around. Considering how Kong Shi had stolen his aura of divinity, no matter what, he should at least return the favor a little. Or else, would he not be making a huge loss? Thus, while he was conducting his soul search earlier, he had made sure to keep a close eye on where the treasure vault was. Naturally, that was where he was heading. Chapter 2089. Returning to Starchaser Palace. He followed the path that he had seen in his soul search and flitted ahead. Other than the semi-divinity realm cultivators, there was no one else in the headquarters of the ethereal hall. Zhongxian had killed all of them earlier, so there should be no more danger lurking in the area. As for the formations that were set up around the area, all of them posed no threat to a formation master of Zhongxian's caliber. Here it is, Zhongxian said with a smile after confirming the location. He swung the Tongshang sword lightly. Catcher. The door was knocked open, revealing a folded space. Treasures of all kinds filled the entire folded space. They were at a quantity that was beyond even Zhongxian's means to count. Voila! As soon as Zhongxian walked into the folded space, he was assaulted by innumerable surges of sword qi, saber qi, and all kinds of different forces. Knowing that those attacks came from the weapon spirits of the artifacts stored in the room, Zhongxian nimbly dodged all of the attacks coming his way. Ding 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 ding. 10 minutes later, Zhongxian looked at the huge array of weapons before him with glowing eyes. As expected of the treasure vault of the ethereal hall headquarters, there were more than 30 semi-divinity artifacts and over 200 heavenly high immortal tier artifact. Even if one gathered every last weapon on the Forsaken Continent, it was unlikely that their value would surpass what he had right before him. It was hard to tell whether this was the inventory that the ethereal hall had managed to accumulate over the years or what they had stolen from the Hall of Gods. Well, regardless of where they came from, the only thing that mattered was that they had all become his. With a grand wave of his hands, he stowed all of them into his storage ring. Then, he turned his attention to the jade bottles by the side. All kinds of pills were flying around the room like a bunch of chirpy canaries. They were all heavenly high immortal tier pills, and they were effective even on semi-divinity realm cultivators. What caught Zhongxian's attention more though were the 1,000 or so premier immortal pills placed atop the shelves. Stowing away everything around him, Zhongxian needed 3 whole storage rings before he was able to collect everything in the treasure vault. First and foremost, I should raise my cultivation to heavenly semi-divinity realm. Instead of hurrying out of the treasure vault, he took a seat in the middle of the room. He got out the Premier Immortal pills and stuffed them into his mouth as he immersed his consciousness into his great codex of spring and autumn. The feeling of not having to worry about having insufficient cultivation resources was truly an exhilarating experience for Zhongxian. He felt like he had never been so extravagant before. Was this how it felt to be loaded? A few breaths later, he stood back up. As of that moment, he had managed to raise his cultivation to heavenly semi-divinity realm and reinforced it. With this, he could be considered to have reached the very peak of the Forsaken Continent. As long as Kong Shi had not reached the level of the gods yet, he was confident that he could fight on equal footing with the other party. After he was done, he left the treasure vault and returned to where Du Qingyuan was. Du Qingyuan had not recovered from the earlier shock yet. There was a dazed look on her face that made it look as if she was daydreaming. "Palace Master Du, do you know how we can return to Starchaser Palace from here?" Zhongxian snapped Du Qingyuan out of her daze. He had previously gone there through the Azure Bridge, and he had only managed to leave through the ability of Kong Shi's evanescent boots. In other words, he had no idea how he could return to the Forsaken Continent from there without the Azure Bridge. However, there was a good chance that Du Qingyuan might have an idea in mind. After all, she had been taken there before the Azure Bridge descended. "My cultivation was sealed when Hall Master Kong brought me here, so I wasn't able to move around freely. However, I was still able to deduce his technique." Palace Master Du quickly gathered her thoughts before continuing. "If I'm not mistaken, he traveled here through the ethereal token." Ethereal token? Zhongxian frowned. He knew that it was possible for the ethereal token to transport one's consciousness to enter the ethereal hall, but did it really wield the ability to teleport a person's entire body? That's right. Don't underestimate the prowess of the ethereal token. It might be small, but its functions are rather remarkable. Just its ability to teleport items you have bought in the ethereal hall already makes it an amazing artifact, Du Qingyuan said. Zhongxian nodded in agreement. It was easy to take the ethereal token for granted, but if one thought about it, it was actually a pretty incredible artifact. The act of teleporting items around was already one usage of spatial teleportation. My guess is that he used it together with the Black Mirror Citadel's Paragon Black Mirror. The Paragon Black Mirror has the ability to pull one's soul into a mirror, and it's also capable of materializing what that is stored within the mirror. Usually, we can only access the ethereal hall with our consciousness, but through the Paragon Black Mirror, it might be possible to enter the illusory ethereal hall with one's real body, Du Qingyuan deduced. While the ethereal hall that cultivators immersed their consciousness into was often described as illusory, it was very much existent in the world. The fact that it was possible for individuals to interact with the environment and one another was enough to prove its existence. It was just that it existed on another dimensional plane, making it impossible for living cultivators to enter it with their physical bodies. The differences in the spatial structures of the two-dimensional planes made it impossible for a living person to even survive the journey into the ethereal hall. As such, even though it was possible to take items in and out of the ethereal hall, no cultivator had managed to step into the ethereal hall with their physical body before. However, through reflecting the illusory ethereal hall on the Paragon Black Mirror, one would be able to bind it to the mirror's dimensional plane. Then, using the Paragon Black Mirror as a gateway, it might be possible to physically enter the illusory ethereal hall safely. If he used the Paragon Black Mirror to reflect the illusory ethereal hall before using the mirror to reflect himself, it's likely that he's able to freely move around the branches of the ethereal hall. Zhongxian widened his eyes in astonishment. That explained why Kong Shi had wanted to obtain the evanescent boots, the Paragon Black Mirror, and the altar. Those three wielded exceptional abilities. If one could enter the illusory ethereal hall with one's real body, through the connections between the illusory ethereal hall and all the ethereal tokens, it would technically be possible to teleport one to wherever an ethereal token existed. Basically, it worked in a similar manner to how one retrieved purchased items from the ethereal hall. Who could have thought that the ethereal token and Paragon Black Mirror could actually be used in such a manner? Unbelievable. Zhongxian pondered for a moment before pointing out the main problem. But we don't have the Paragon Black Mirror with us. Even if they had figured out how Kong Shi managed to move around, It would make no difference if they did not have the Paragon Black Mirror with them. No, wait. Even though we don't have the Paragon Black Mirror with us, we can still create a folded space that we can enter and teleport through the ethereal token. Zhongxian smacked his forehead. Why did he not think about it earlier? That does sound feasible, but I don't think it's that easy to create a folded space stable enough to carry life while traveling into the illusory ethereal hall, Du Qingyuan replied with a frown. It was the kind of thing that sounded theoretically feasible but might not work in practice. For one, creating a folded space was no easy feat on the Forsaken Continent. If so, the 6 sects would have long uncovered such a transportation technique, and they would not have to spend days on end sitting atop aerial immortal beasts to move around. More importantly, it could be extremely dangerous. This medium of transportation was under the control of the ethereal hall, and if anything went wrong, they might fall into the cracks of space and be unable to return. It might be difficult to do it anywhere else, but in here. Well, just wait here for a moment, Zhongxian said before disappearing. He could easily create stable folded spaces back on the Master-Teacher continent, but it was not as easy to do so there. However, while he was still unable to do it, it did not mean that others would be unable to do so. In fact, there was one nearby waiting for his picking. The treasure vault earlier was one perfect example of a stable folded space that could carry life. With a grasp of his hand, Zhongxian compressed the folded space in the treasure vault until it fitted nicely in his palm. Boom! With his cultivation reaching heavenly semi-divinity realm, his current strength was definitely on par with Kongsha's previously. While he did not possess the Heaven's Order, which granted one superior powers over spacetime, he was at least still able to manipulate a folded space like that. He took out a storage ring and placed the sealed folded space into it. Palace Master Du, please enter the folded space. Du Qingyuan nodded as she lowered her guard. In the next moment, she vanished from the spot. After pulling Du Qingyuan into the folded space, Zhongxian took out an ethereal token and infused his consciousness into it. Even though he was in a place impossible to access from the Forsaken Continent, considering how he was in the ethereal hall headquarters, he should still be able to access the illusory ethereal hall without any trouble and contact the others. Soon enough, Han Zhenqiu appeared before him, and upon seeing Zhongxian in the ethereal hall, he heaved a sigh of relief. Sect leader Zhong, how are you faring over there? Are you still doing fine? Shortly after Zhongxian entered the portal, the altar on the other side had been destroyed, causing the portal to dissipate. That had left all of them at Starchaser Palace panicking. They had feared that something had happened to Zhongxian. Only when he saw the young man before him once more was he finally able to calm his heart. I'm fine. I'll place a storage ring on the auction later. Buy it and take it out in Starchaser Palace's ethereal hall right after, understood? Zhongxian instructed. Yes. Han Zhenqiu nodded even though he did not know what Zhongxian was up to. After instructing Han Zhenqiu, he quickly backed out of the ethereal hall and placed the storage ring on the ethereal hall's auction. Following that, he brought the serpentine dragon out. Here is a blank ethereal token. I need you to remain here and guard it. Make sure to appear immediately as soon as I call for you, understood? Zhongxian said. With the recent breakthrough to the semi-divinity realm, the serpentine dragon's soul had grown strong enough for it to enter the ethereal hall with its consciousness. Zhongxian wanted to return to the Forsaken Continent to look for Kongsha, but there was a chance that he might have to visit the Hall of Gods once more in the future. Thus, he had to prepare in advance. If he could really return to the Forsaken Continent through this method, he should be able to go back there by liaising with the serpentine dragon. Knowing what its master was trying to do, the serpentine dragon nodded. I understand. Also, make sure to hide well. Don't let anyone find you. There's a chance that Hall Master Kong might come back here, Zhongxian instructed sternly. The serpentine dragon nodded before shrinking itself to roughly the size of a thumb. Its real body, which was several hundred meters long, was simply too conspicuous. It was too easy for someone to spot him even from a distance away. However, if he shrunk himself to the size of a thumb, it would be hard for someone to find him amid the vast hall. After handling the serpentine dragon, Zhongxian entered the folded space in the storage ring as well. Following that, the serpentine dragon tapped the ethereal token lightly, and the storage ring disappeared from view. On the Forsaken Continent, an ethereal token lit up brilliantly as a storage ring materialized from a teleportation formation. Who? Zhong Xian came out from the folded space in the storage ring. When he saw Han Zhenqiu and the others, he heaved a deep sigh of relief. It really worked. Even though the plan had sounded feasible in theory, there were many complications that could have happened when putting it into practice. In fact, his heart had been beating worriedly throughout the entire process. If someone on either side of the ethereal token had betrayed him or the ethereal hall had noticed what they were up to, they might have ended up banished into the cracks of space. In any case, it was a huge relief that everything had worked out well. It also appeared that the ethereal hall had not noticed what they had done yet. After all, such trades were held often enough for the ethereal hall not to pay close attention to every transaction. Teacher. Upon seeing Zhong Xian, the eyes of Zhao Yue and the others lit up in agitation. Zhong Xian was just about to call them when he noticed something that sent his eyebrows shooting upward. All of you have managed to reach the heavenly high immortal realm. Prior to his departure, Zhao Yue and the others had still been at the true immortal realm. Yet, at that very moment, all of them had reached the heavenly high immortal realm, and it looked as if they were ready to achieve a breakthrough at any moment. But he had barely been gone for a few hours. Had his students always been so talented? Chapter 2090 Zhong Xian imparts. All along, Zhong Xian thought that he was able to cultivate quite quickly. Nevertheless, he still spent half a month to raise his cultivation from ancient sage 4 Dan to high immortal realm. The sweat and blood he had put into it were enough to make any man break down in tears. It could be said that every step he took was immensely difficult. It was true that these 11 direct disciples of his had the simplified Heaven's Path divine art, and they had sufficient immortal pills to fuel their cultivation too. But how did they manage to raise their cultivation from true immortal realm to heavenly high immortal realm within just a few hours? This was ridiculous. It isn't fast at all. We took an entire month after your departure to reach our current level. Zhao Yue replied sheepishly. An entire month. Zhong Xian frowned. Was I away for that long? He knew that the flow of time in the ethereal hall was 1/10 of the Forsaken Continent. Going by what Zhao Yue said, a month in the Forsaken Continent should equate to roughly 3 days or 72 hours in the ethereal hall. But all in all, he had only spent at most 2 hours in the Hall of Gods and 4 hours in the ethereal hall. Even factoring in 4 hours he spent climbing up the pillars, it would only total up to 10 hours at the very most. That was different far off from the estimated 72 hours. Unless. A thought suddenly surfaced in Zhong Xian's mind. Could it be that the flow of time in the Hall of Gods is also 1/10 of the ethereal hall? In other words, it is 1:100 of the Forsaken Continent. If the flow of time in the Hall of Gods was even slower, that would make sense. Using a 1:100 ratio, he had spent 2 hours in the Hall of Gods and 4 hours climbing up the Azure Bridge, which equated to 600 hours on the Forsaken Continent. Factoring in the 4 hours he had spent in the ethereal hall headquarters, that would be around 640 hours. If so, it would indeed have been around a month on the Forsaken Continent. The flow of time in the Hall of Gods is actually 1:100 of the Forsaken Continent. Is the flow of time in the firmament that slow as well? It would really be frightening if that was the case. The slower the flow of time, the stabler the temporal laws of the world were. Space and time were often collectively termed as spacetime because the two of them had an inseverable relationship with one another. If the flow of time was indeed 1/100th of the azure, that would likely mean that the stability of the space in the firmament was 100-fold as well. And beings who existed in dimensions with stabler spacetime were likely to be much more powerful as well, especially since they would have to endure the greater pressure from the spatial laws. In a sense, this provided Zhong Xian with a peek into just how powerful the gods of the firmament were. If so, Kong Shi would likely be a terribly difficult opponent to deal with if he were to successfully make a breakthrough. Shaking his head, Zhong Xian put away these thoughts in his mind and turned to look at his disciples. If they really had a month to work with, given their stable foundation and ample resources, It was indeed not too difficult for them to make a breakthrough from true immortal realm to heavenly high immortal realm. Sit here and listen well. I'll be imparting to you my comprehension of semi-divinity realm, as well as the crux of God's intent, Zhong Xian said. Given the current situation, they still wouldn't be of much help at heavenly high immortal realm. They would have to be at semi-divinity realm at the very minimum to be able to even stand a chance against Kongsha. Since they were ready for it, he should lend them a hand for the final breakthrough. All in all, he had comprehended 7 gods' intent so far. As long as his disciples were to comprehend the essence of one of them, they should be able to make a breakthrough to semi-divinity realm easily. Yes. Seeing that their teacher was going to conduct a lecture, Zhao Ya and the others quickly sat down and waited excitedly for the lecture to begin. Han Jianxiu and the others were initially intending to leave the room as well, but after hearing Zhong Xian's words, they chose to linger around the sides of the room instead. In order to reach semi-divinity, you must first comprehend what divinity is. An unequaled existence, a being that has transcended nature, that is what divinity is. In order to reach that level, one must first affirm his own will and temper his determination. Zhong Xian spoke in a slow voice. As semi-divinity realm cultivators, Han Jianxiu and the others initially didn't think that Zhong Xian's lecture would be able to value add to them. However, after hearing for a while, they soon found themselves completely engrossed over his words. Despite having made the breakthrough themselves, the truth was that they still didn't have a complete understanding of what the realm comprised either. They were able to drive the power in their body freely, but they had no idea where the power originated from and how it worked. This was similar to how a human might not necessarily know how each and every part of his body functioned. The reason why they were able to succeed was due to absorbing the unique aura in the circular platform by the Azure Bridge. Furthermore, the number of semi-divinity realm cultivators on the Forsaken Continent had always been severely limited, so it was inevitable that there was very little knowledge regarding the realm being passed down. As a result, their comprehension of the realm was half-baked. Even if they wanted to, they wouldn't be able to properly impart the quintessence of semi-divinity realm to their disciples either. However, things would be different from this day onward. Zhong Xian's lecture was simple and direct, allowing the listeners to grasp the crux swiftly. Along with this understanding, the zhunqi in their dantian immediately began moving on its own accord. Boom! Barely 2 hours after the lecture started, a powerful aura surged into the air. Zhao Ya and the others, who were still trapped at heavenly high immortal realm a moment ago, actually managed to make a breakthrough simultaneously. Zhong Xian had already passed them a portion of the unique aura from the circular platforms not too long ago. With their newfound enlightenment, they were swiftly rushing toward a higher realm. Han Jianxiu and the others also managed to advance their cultivation to heavenly semi-divinity realm too. Their zhunqi became much purer and more condensed, granting them greater fighting prowess. Soon, the lecture came to an end. Han Jianxiu and the others also quickly halted their cultivation, and looking at Zhong Xian, he asked, "Teacher, what's the current situation with the Hall of Gods?" They had been too engrossed in cultivation that they forgot to ask about the details after Zhong Xian teleported over via the altar. "It's like this." Zhong Xian swiftly told the others what he had encountered after moving to the other side of the portal. "So, you are saying that Hall Master Kong has stolen the aura of divinity, and it's likely that he'll be able to reach the level of the gods?" Han Jianxiu narrowed his eyes in shock. Zhong Xian nodded in agreement. "If he were to succeed, it's likely that it'll be the end of all of us. Given Kong Shi's abnormal obsession with the fragments of heavens, it was likely that he would try to snatch the library of heaven's path away from him after he became a god. With his strength then, even with over 20 semi-divinities on their side, they would still be in a disadvantageous position. Putting everything aside, Han Jianxiu and the others wouldn't even be a match for him teamed up together, so it was unlikely that they would be able to put up a fight against a god-level Kong Shi. Whether that Kong Shi was fake or not, his fighting prowess was the real deal. "What should we do then?" Elder Kue Xiao asked worriedly. "There are only 2 things that we can do at the moment. First, we look for Kong Shi and snatch the aura of divinity away from him. As long as we are able to stop him from achieving a breakthrough, we'll be victorious," Zhong Xian said. The crowd nodded in agreement. As long as Kongsha didn't reach the level of the gods, they would still be able to stand against him with their current strength. If so, the other party wouldn't dare to move recklessly. It was just that there was a major flaw with that course of action. After obtaining the aura of divinity, the next logical step that Kongsha would make was to find a place where no one would be able to find him and cultivate. There was no way he would leave behind any clues that would lead them to him. It was likely that even his most trusted subordinate didn't know where he was hiding at this moment. Zhongxian paused for a moment before continuing on. Second, we have to accrue sufficient strength that would allow us to deal with a god. That's the only way we can cope with the danger ahead of us. If they couldn't find Kongsha and snatch back the aura of divinity, the only thing they could do was to reinforce their defense. If they could set up a formation which even gods were unable to escape from, or if he could just kill Kongsha with the golden page that he had at the moment, they would be able to resolve the danger that Kongsha posed. But would the golden page really wield sufficient strength to kill a god? Zhongxian wasn't confident of that at all. There was no doubt that the golden page was a powerful weapon, and it had saved him on many occasions as well. However, its prowess seemed to be dependent on the might of the heavens in the world he was in. This was similar to how it was impossible for the heavens of the master-teacher continent to kill him anymore. The most that it could do was to expel him from their world. The current library of Heaven's Path was augmented by the heavens of the Azure, which meant that the golden page was likely able to obliterate any semi-divinity realm cultivator easily. However, if the opponent was a god, an existence that surpassed the Azure itself, the chances of success were extremely slim indeed. The reason why he was able to kill the deity descending from the Azure back then was because the latter was still at ancient Sage 4 Dan. That was the highest level that the master-teacher continent permitted one to reach. Any higher than that would be impossible. Of course, this was just his conjecture at the moment too. It would be for the best if the golden page really worked, but he had no intention of gambling his all on that single hope. He didn't like the idea of leaving his fate to luck. More importantly, Kongsha knew about the existence of his heaven's imperfection, so there was a chance that the other party was aware of his trump card as well. If the other party were to go all out to guard against it, he wasn't certain if he would really be able to land a clean blow with the golden page. If not for this, he would have already used the golden page back when he encountered Kongsha outside the real Hall of Gods. He only held himself back because Kongsha was too far away then, which significantly lowered the chances of success were extremely low. Accrue sufficient strength. It won't be easy, but I think it's feasible. If our teacher is able to reach the level of the gods too, he should be able to deal with Hall Master Kong, Han Jianqiu said. Those words left a bitter smile on Zhongxian's lips. He didn't have any aura of divinity with him, and he hadn't come up with a feasible cultivation technique for him to achieve a breakthrough with yet too. It had only been a day since he had reached semi-divinity after comprehending the sentiments between a master and a subordinate. It would take some time for him to make a breakthrough again. Teacher, didn't you say that you have already saved Palace Master Du? Why don't I see anywhere? She knows quite a bit about the gods, so she might have an idea in mind. Elder Qin Yuan suddenly spoke up. Ah, I forgot. Zhongxian widened his eyes in astonishment. In the next moment, Du Qingyuan appeared before everyone. He was too caught up with the series of events that happened afterward that he forgot to let Du Qingyuan out from the folded space. Paying respects to Palace Master Du, Han Jianqiu quickly filled Du Qingyuan in on the quandary they were facing before asking the question. Palace Master Du, do you know of any alternative ways that would allow a cultivator to become a god other than through the aura of divinity? If our Starchaser Palace is in possession of such knowledge, a god would have long appeared amongst us, Du Qingyuan replied sharply. Hearing her definite reply, awkward looks appeared on everyone's faces. Indeed. If there was an alternative way to reach the levels of the gods, the geniuses of the Starchaser Palace would have long done so. They wouldn't have been so helpless in the face of the Hall Master Kong too. Is there really no hope at all? Han Jianqiu remarked with anxious reddened eyes. Chapter 2091 Entering the City of Collapsed Space once more, everything would just become history. New semi-divinity realm cultivators had appeared amongst the four sects, and the number would only continue to increase with Zhongxian imparting the crux of God's intent to them. They thought that this would bring about an era of prosperity as cultivators reached greater heights, but if they failed to deal with Hall Master Kong properly, everything would just become history. There's no feasible way to do so, unless... At this point, Du Qingyuan's voice suddenly paused for a moment as a thought suddenly emerged in her head. Unless what? Du Qingyuan had a conflicted expression on her face for a moment before she finally spoke up hesitantly. If we are able to find the source of the air of degeneration in the city of collapsed space, there might be a chance that we are able to acquire some aura of divinity. The source of the air of degeneration? What does that have to do with anything? Zhongxian asked with a frown. He had been to the city of collapsed space once, and he knew just how frightening the air of degeneration there was. Even his Heaven's Path Shenqi was unable to ward it off completely. The only thing that could curb it was Little Chick's chicken soup. It was a force which even semi-divinity realm cultivators were unable to expel from their body. If he wasn't around back then, Jiang Yao would have been a lifeless corpse by now. Why would Du Qingyuan ask him to trace down the source of the air of degeneration? Legend has it that the city of collapsed space isn't a city native to the Forsaken Continent. Instead, it's a city that has fallen from the firmament, and the corpses of the gods are buried beneath it. Du Qingyuan replied. A city that has fallen from the firmament. Zhongxian was slightly stunned. Han Jianqiu and the others were taken aback as well. This was the first time they were hearing about this. All along, the city of collapsed space had been a restricted zone for the cultivators. There was no one who could have imagined that it was actually a city from the firmament. It's said that the city suddenly fell from the heavens several thousand years ago. Back then, the phenomenon drew countless people to venture its depths, hoping to find the treasures of the gods, but as most of you would be able to guess, all of them died, Du Qingyuan said. There is probably no one in the Forsaken Continent who knows about the true origin of the city of collapsed space anymore. I only happened to overhear the spirit god speaking about the matter too. The spirit god. Zhongxian's body tensed up a little. Yuan. The spirit god fell into a long moment of silence when she first heard about the city of collapsed space on the Forsaken Continent. After that, she unwittingly mentioned that it's a city that has fallen from the firmament due to the wars going on up there, and many gods have lost their lives in that city. She also explained that the air of degeneration is a product of the aura of divinity released by the decomposition of the gods' corpses reacting with the environment of the Forsaken Continent, resulting in an aberration. If we are able to trace the origin of the air of degeneration, it might be possible for us to find some untainted aura of divinity to make a breakthrough. Du Qingyuan said. So, you are saying that this is actually the aura of divinity too? Taking out a sliver of the air of degeneration he had stored in a jade bottle previously, Zhongxian remarked in astonishment. He had taken quite a few of this when he went to the city of collapsed space a while ago. He also made use of it to kill a semi-divinity realm expert from the Hall of Gods too. All along, while he did find it weird how there was actually something on the azure which even semi-divinity realm cultivators weren't able to deal with, he didn't think too much into it. After all, nature could be extremely bewildering at times. However, if what Du Qingyuan said was true, everything would make sense. It was a known fact that a cultivator would be doomed once the air of degeneration seeped into his body. No medicine could cure that at all. Even Zhongxian's seemingly omnipotent Heaven's Path Shenqi was unable to cleanse the air of degeneration either. From this, it was clear that the air of degeneration was something that had surpassed the level of the azure. Thus, it was indeed plausible for the air of degeneration to have originated from the aura of divinity. Only gods possessed the ability to render even heavenly semi-divinity realm cultivators utterly helpless. This is a matter I heard the spirit god speak about in passing, so I can't affirm its authenticity. Even if it's true, there's a chance that the origin of the air of degeneration has been corrupted too. Furthermore, I believe all of you are aware of just how frightening the air of degeneration can be. Just being afflicted with the slightest hint of it is enough to seal one's fate. This is also the reason why I wasn't able to verify it even when I have received this piece of intelligence, Du Qingyuan said. I trust Ruoxin. If those words came from her mouth, there's a high likelihood that it'll be true, Zhongxian spoke up. Just the fact that there was something peculiar about the air of degeneration wasn't enough to verify that it had originated from the aura of divinity. However, he knew Luo Ruoxin's character well. She wasn't the type of person to speak of something she wasn't certain of. There was likely a basis behind her claim. Since that was the case, it would indeed be worth investigating the source of the air of degeneration. Since that's the case, I'll head to the city of collapsed space with Palace Master Du. As for the rest of you, I'll entrust you with the important job of making preparations for the final battle in case we fail, Zhongxian instructed. Despite the risks, this was a trip they would have to make. He wasn't doing this just so he could deal with Kongsha. More importantly, he had to reach the level of the gods in order to ascend to the firmament. Only then would he be able to find Luo Ruoxin. Rest assured, teacher. We'll make sure that everything is in place by the time you return, Han Jianqiu declared resolutely. Teacher. Palace Master Du was surprised by how Han Jianqiu was addressing Zhongxian. Han Jianqiu, what did you address Zhongxian as earlier? Did you acknowledge Zhongxian as your teacher? As they had gotten right into the serious matters as soon as she appeared, Du Qingyuan was still unaware that the heads of the other sects had already acknowledged Zhongxian as their teacher. Indeed. Kuei Xiao, Qin Yuan, and I have acknowledged sect leader Zhong as our teacher, Han Jianqiu replied with a smile. It was unheard of for powerhouses like them to actually acknowledge a young man in his 20s as their teacher. However, they didn't regret their decision. If not for the young man's teaching, they wouldn't have been able to make a breakthrough to heavenly semi-divinity realm so easily. The rest of you did so too? Du Qingyuan was flabbergasted. One must know that all three of them were the strongest existences on the Forsaken Continent, but they were actually able to lower their pride and acknowledge Zhongxian as their teacher. She did know that there was something extraordinary about Zhongxian, but even this was a little too much for her to accept. Noticing Du Qingyuan's shock, Zhongxian chirped in with a smile, I don't mind if you wish to acknowledge me as your teacher too. It would be for the best if Du Qingyuan could bring him a golden page too. In any case, he would only accept her as an ordinary student and not a direct disciple, so there was no need for him to hesitate too much over this. Hey, I don't want to. Taken aback by the abrupt offer, Du Qingyuan quickly shook her head and turned him down unhesitatingly. Then, realizing that she might have been a little too rude, she quickly added, thanks for the offer. There was no denying that she was a little moved by the request. She knew that Zhongxian was the lover of the spirit god, and she had no doubt that he would eventually achieve great things in the future. However, she simply couldn't accept the act of acknowledging someone so much younger than her as her teacher. I see. It's fine then. Let's set off to the city of collapsed space now. Zhongxian knew that it was unlikely for the golden page to be formed if Du Qingyuan wasn't willing, so he didn't insist on the matter. He took the lead and began heading toward the city of collapsed space, and Du Qingyuan followed him closely. After comprehending the pathos of heavens, his speed had become much faster than before. The previous time around, it took him half a day in order to get to the desert above the city of collapsed space. This time around, it only took him 4 hours. He swiftly found the entrance once more and descended beneath the sand. Tracing his footsteps, he quickly arrived at where he saved Jiang Yarrow back then. Du Qingyuan took a look at the surroundings before remarking, this isn't it. We have to find the very center of the city of collapsed space. In truth, she hadn't been to the city of collapsed space before. However, the predecessors of the Starchaser Palace had been here before, and they had left records of their expedition behind. It was through these records that Jiang Yarrow was able to lure Fu Chunzi and the others into a trap, nearly killing them. The two of them continued proceeding ahead. Through his superior strength, Zhongxian was able to easily deal with the degeneration beasts that stood in their way. There wasn't anything that could pose a threat to him along the way. Following behind the young man, Du Qingyuan felt a little conflicted within as she watched the young man dealing with those bizarre creatures, which she would have never dared to approach, with ease. This wasn't the first time she was witnessing Zhongxian's strength anymore, but she still found herself astounded by how powerful he was. She couldn't help but wonder just how he cultivated to become so powerful within such a short period of time. They continued to search the area for another 2 hours, but they didn't manage to find what they were looking for. Realizing that it was futile to search this massive city aimlessly, Zhongxian finally came to a halt and said, "We won't be able to find the origin of the heir of degeneration like that. What do you propose then?" Du Qingyuan asked with a frown. Her understanding of this place stopped at the records of the predecessors, so naturally, she was at a complete loss of how they should look for the source of the heir of degeneration too. Otherwise, she wouldn't have allowed herself to be dragged aimlessly around the place by the Zhongxian either. Zhongxian pondered for a moment before speaking up, "I think we can try this instead." "Who?" His clone appeared before him. Given his current strength, there was pretty much no one who could hurt him on the Azure anymore. As such, it was no longer a big deal for him to reveal the existence of his clone anymore. "Is that your clone?" Du Qingyuan was slightly confused. She didn't understand what Zhongxian was trying to do. Did his clone possess some kind of mysterious ability that would help them in this situation? "Stand properly," Zhongxian instructed as he took out the Tongzhang sword. Then, without any hesitation, he slashed the sword at his clone's arm. Tzzzzzzzz. As soon as the clone was injured, the surrounding air of degeneration immediately surged in furiously. The sheer concentration of it caused it to materialize as a grayish fog in the surroundings. It should be safe to assume that the origin would have a higher concentration of the air of degeneration. Zhongxian explained the motive of his actions. Understanding Zhongxian's intent, Palace Master Du's eyes lit up and she exclaimed in excitement, "You're right." But of course, that was easier said than done. The city of collapsed space was a confined space, and over the past several thousand years, the air of degeneration had diffused to near homogeneity in the area. While it was likely that there was a concentration gradient, it was so slight that it would be nearly imperceptible. Thus, they had to rile up the air of degeneration in the surroundings a little before they would be able to detect any difference. "That way." Du Qingyuan quickly pointed a way out. Nodding his head in agreement, Zhongxian and his clone quickly headed in that direction. Every now and then, when they weren't sure where to go anymore, Zhongxian would unhesitatingly bestow a slash upon his clone in order to trigger his compass function. By the 8th time, the clone was already on the verge of exploding from rage. Fortunately, a decrepit temple appeared before them at this moment. Despite having been reduced to ruins, this temple still spanned over a distance of more than 10 li, making it hard to imagine just how grand it was before it collapsed. Due to the corrosion of the air of degeneration, the shattered bricks were covered with a thin layer of darkness. The land was completely barren, devoid of any greenery. From time to time, a sinister gale would blow over, causing one to shiver from the eeriness. "Is this it?" Du Qingyuan frowned doubtfully. Despite the bizarre nature of the air of degeneration, there were still some unique plants that managed to blossom in such a climate. Thus, it was hard to imagine that the origin was located in a place as barren as this. "It should be," Zhongxian replied. Till now, the wound on his clone's body was still bleeding. Judging from the concentration of air of degeneration in the air, they should be at the origin. There was no other place in the city of collapsed space that felt as discomforting as here. "We should hurry up and search the area then." Not wanting to linger around this area for too long, Du Qingyuan quickly examined the ruins carefully, fearing that she would miss out the slightest detail. On the other hand, Zhongxian didn't seem to be in much of a rush. He traded glances with his clone as they continued perceiving their surroundings carefully. A moment later, they slowly walked over to an area filled with rubble. Zhongxian lifted his hand, and with a powerful wave of his palm, the rubble on the floor was swept to the side, revealing an uneven ground filled with depressions. Dark streaks scarred the ground, hinting at the existence of a sinister force. Zhongxian took out his Tongzhang sword and flicked out a piece of boulder from the ground. Taking a closer look at the boulder, he found that even its insides had been dyed in darkness. A bizarre glint could be seen reflecting off its surface. It felt like a glaring beast that would devour one's soul whole if one were to stare at it for too long. Zhongxian carefully touched the boulder with his finger. Wang. A book was compiled in the Library of Heaven's Path. Godblood rock, formed through assimilating the blood of the gods. This was a part of the description written in the book. "We're at the right spot." Zhongxian nodded before a slight frown crept onto his forehead. When he first caught sight of the boulder, he found it extremely familiar. It was just that there were some anomalies regarding its color. So, he dug out a piece to take a closer look with the Library of Heaven's Path, and it affirmed his thoughts. If this was the Godblood rock, the black streaks on the ground would indeed have been caused by the flow of Godblood. The only doubt he harbored was that, why did this Godblood rock feel so crass? Unlike the Godblood rock formed through Luo Ruoxin's blood, it felt unrefined and rough. Could it be that there were different tiers of Godblood too? Chapter 2092 Tombstone. With a flick of his wrist, Zhongxian took out a piece of the Godblood rock he had taken from the ocean of exiled stars and compared the two together. The difference was really similar to that between an inkstone and a jewel. They were made out of the same material, but their appearances were vastly different. Without taking a close look, it was impossible to discern that they were actually the same thing. The Godblood rock is formed when the blood of a god seeps into a stone. Since that's the case, it's extremely likely that the gods' corpses are lying around here. Rising to his feet, Zhongxian swung his Tongzhang sword, and all of the rubble around the area was swept to the side. On the exposed ground, he found more boulders with the same appearance as the black Godblood rock. In other words, the blood of the gods had permeated the entire area. Palace Master Du. Zhongxian immediately beckoned. Du Qingyuan hurriedly flew over. She didn't manage to find anything much in the area. You found it? Not yet. However, I think that these black streaks are a hint to where the corpses of the gods are, Zhongxian said as he gestured to the ground. Du Qingyuan turned her gaze over. There was indeed something weird about the black streaks on the ground. They seemed to form some sort of mysterious message when looking at them on the whole. Taking a closer look, it was actually rather similar to the inscriptions on the heaven anchoring boulder. After looking around with a deep frown for a moment, Du Qingyuan suddenly exclaimed with widened eyes, "It looks like a ritual." Ritual? I believe that these inscriptions on the floor were formed using fresh blood. Most likely, they were in the midst of a large-scale ritual when the entire city suddenly fell from the firmament. Du Qingyuan revealed her analysis with a grim look on her face. This, Zhongxian's heart skipped a beat. Normal rituals could be conducted by tributing treasures and artifacts, but some of the more malicious ones might require sacrifices and fresh blood in order to activate. Back then, Sovereign Chen Ling killed over 100,000 of his subordinates in order to summon a deity from the azure so that he could swiftly recover from his injuries. Could it be that someone was attempting to do something similar to that? It would be too naive to think that the fall of the city coincidentally happened in the midst of the ritual. Most likely, the city was banished from the firmament by some sort of force after being caught conducting such a ritual. However, rituals that made use of sacrifices tended to be extremely powerful. It was hard to imagine how powerful that force had to be in order to kick the city out of the firmament in the midst of the ritual. As long as we find the center point of the ritual, we should be able to find the origin of the heir of degeneration, Du Qingyuan said. Using her zhenqi, she swiftly cleaned away the rubble within 100 meters radius, revealing a huge black door beneath. This door is located at the center of the inscriptions. Let's head in to take a look, Du Qingyuan said as she walked forward and pushed open the door. She was just about to enter when Zhongxian suddenly stopped her. Taking a deep breath, Zhongxian took the lead in. It seemed like the temple extended to the underground as well. Everything above had collapsed, but the space beneath had managed to remain intact over the years, presumably because it was tightly sealed. Tzzzzzzzz. Barely after entering, Zhongxian immediately felt innumerable sword chi flying in his direction. He adept waved the Tongzhang sword, extending his sword intent into the surroundings. A heart of intertwined thread. Knowing the dangers that lurked within the city of collapsed space, Zhongxian didn't hold back at all. Peng peng peng. With a few dull groans, several black silhouettes dissipated into the shadows. They are degeneration beasts too. However, they appear to be far stronger than those we have faced above. Du Qingyuan remarked with a hushed voice from behind. Zhongxian replied with a nod. These degeneration beasts seemed no different from specters lingering in the shadows of the night, preying upon living beings who dared step in their direction. Zhongxian had killed many degeneration beasts along the way, but they were all only at high immortal realm. Yet, the ones which he had just dealt with had astonishingly reached semi-divinity realm. Had it been anyone else in his place, it was likely that he wouldn't have even survived the first wave of attack, eventually fulfilling the fate of being corroded down to bones. The air of degeneration seems to be coming from there, Du Qingyuan pointed out anxiously. Looking in the direction where Du Qingyuan had pointed out, Zhongxian saw the black streaks congregating at the very center of the underground hall. So, he carefully made his way over. There was a small altar placed on top of the area where all of the black streaks had originated from. This. Zhongxian was a little taken aback. Even though it was small, the altar looked extremely similar to the altar of the Starchaser Palace. The only difference would be that the altar right before him was of an even higher tier. If the altar Wu Chen used was from the Forsaken Continent and the one Du Qingyuan used was from the Azure, the one before him must have definitely come from the firmament. Zhongxian could not discern what it was made of, but despite being buried for several thousand years, it didn't seem to be worn out at the very least. In fact, it was emanating a slight glow. Could it be that? Du Qingyuan clenched her fists tightly in agitation. There could only be one reason why there was an altar in the city of collapsed space which closely resembled the guardian artifact of the Starchaser Palace. It was hard to believe it, but the evidence seemed to be pointing toward that direction. Just as what she had heard from the preceding palace master, it was likely that the population on Starchaser Island had indeed originated from the firmament. It looks like what he said is true. Zhongxian nodded in agreement. Back then, after saving him, the fake Kong Sure explained the origins of the 6 sects, and he mentioned that those living on the Starchaser Island were actually exiled gods. Noting the slight look on confusion on Du Qingyuan's face, Zhongxian told her about the story he had heard from the fake Kong Sure back then. Du Qingyuan shook her head and said, "Such information has been passed down verbally through each generation of palace master, but I thought that such a thing couldn't have been true. But this." The other 5 major sects of the Forsaken Continent had proclaimed themselves as the exiled gods, and as time passed by, those lies ended up being taken for real. There was no way of knowing when and why those lies had started spreading. Too much time had passed since then to investigate the matter. However, those lies had indeed become the conventional truth on the Forsaken Continent. There was no longer anyone who would try to question those claims anymore. Even if Zhongxian were to reveal the truth to everyone in the Azure, there would be very few people who would believe him. But again, the truth no longer mattered at this point anymore. The fact was that no one on the Forsaken Continent was able to reach the level of the gods anymore, so these lies were nothing more than words that made one feel good about oneself. Zhongxian walked around the perimeter of the altar, but he didn't notice anything worthy of note. With a helpless sigh, he said, "It doesn't seem like there's anything here aside from the altar. While it's placed at the very center of the ritual, it doesn't seem to be the source of the air of degeneration." It was a little bizarre how the air of degeneration suddenly thinned out around the altar. If he hadn't known for certain that he was in the city of collapsed space, he might have thought that he had been teleported back to the Azure somehow. However, Du Qingyuan had a very different view from Zhongxian. There must be a reason why this altar is placed here. I think that it's highly likely that the aura of divinity lies right here. Oh. Since this altar is similar to that in our Starchaser Palace, I'll try and see if I can assimilate it with my bloodline. Du Qingyuan slit her wrist with a surge of sword qi before dripping her blood on the black streaks around the ritual. Fresh blood flowed along with the black streaks, and it didn't take long before they were all dyed crimson. Right after, as if a formation had come to life, a brilliant burst of light surged outward. Hong long long. The altar began to rattle. Du Qingyuan's face had already turned pale at this point, but she continued to allow her blood to flow freely from her wrist. With the tribute of her blood, the light grew brighter and brighter. Whenever her wound started clotting, she would carve a new one with her fingernails. Just like that, she left 3 strokes on her wrist. It was fortunate that there was no air of degeneration in the area, or else she would have been corroded down to bones before her blood could even flow out. Boom. Just as Du Qingyuan was reaching her limits, the altar suddenly glowed brilliantly. There was a feeling of great disorientation before the two of them realized that they had been teleported into an area even darker than before. The entire area was shrouded with a layer of thick mist, hindering one's line of sight. Be careful. Zhong Xian quickly fed Du Qingyuan with a bottle of chicken soup and Premier Immortal pill before she finally recovered from her exertion. It felt as if they had tumbled into the depths of a cave. There was a vague scent of charred earth lingering in the air. Are we still in the city of collapsed space? Du Qingyuan asked with a frown. Zhong Xian replied solemnly, I don't know, but I think it's likely that we might have arrived at the source of the air of degeneration. He could feel a powerful and terrifying power amidst the dark area they were in. Putting aside his current strength, he felt that even if he were to reach the level of the gods, he would still be no match for this existence. The fact that he was feeling such a heavy pressure likely meant that there was a real god hidden amidst the darkness, similar to what they had heard previously. I'm hungry. I want to eat. A chirpy voice suddenly echoed in Zhong Xian's mind. It was Little Chick. Shut up, Zhong Xian replied snappishly. It was likely that they were standing before a frightening existence, but all Little Chick could think of was food. Could it be more of a wastrel than this? He had never met a real god before, but even someone of vicious level was able to recover after being killed. Regardless of whether the being lying within this dark space was dead or alive, the other party was an existence which a semi-divinity realm cultivator like him should definitely not offend. But I'm hungry. Little Chick cried out. Eat these Premier Immortal pills to fill your stomach, Zhong Xian replied impatiently as he moved a bottle of Premier Immortal pills into his tamed beast sack. Little Chick immediately waddled its way gracefully over and pecked on one of it. Seeing that it wasn't causing any trouble for the time being, Zhong Xian heaved a sigh of relief before proceeding deeper in with Du Qingyuan. A massive tombstone soon appeared before their eyes. 5 words were inscribed on it. It was emanating an imposing pressure that prevented others from proceeding any further ahead. Zhong Xian began to examine the tombstone. The inscriptions on the tombstone were similar to that on the Azure Bridge as well, making it hard for him to discern its meaning. This. By his side, Du Qingyuan's body suddenly began trembling. You recognize these words? Zhong Xian asked with a frown. Du Qingyuan nodded with a pale face. Her voice trembled as she spoke. It reads, Tomb of the Deathless Monarch. Deathless Monarch? Zhong Xian was stunned. It said that he's an extremely powerful expert of the firmament, a being who exists alongside the heavens and the earth. He's known to be an existence who can't be killed, but he's actually dead? Du Qingyuan could hardly believe a being who existed alongside the heavens and the earth. Zhong Xian narrowed his eyes. He had no way of telling whether Du Qingyuan was true or not, but just the other party's title as the Deathless Monarch spoke a lot about the other party's strength and abilities. For a being who was bestowed with the title of Deathless to lose his life here. Just what in the world happened in the city of collapsed space? Who dares to barge in here? Zhong Xian was still trying to make sense of the situation before him when a hostile voice echoed in the air. Amidst the mysterious dark mist lingering in the area, a figure slowly made its way over. He clutched the Tongshang sword as he looked at the approaching figure warily. In the next moment, a black skeleton suddenly appeared before his eyes. The black skeleton was tall, and a dark menacing glint reflected off its surface. It carried an imposing pressure which made its tremendous strength clearly known. This was the first time Zhong Xian felt so deeply threatened. Even when he first encountered Vicious Heartback in the underground cavern, he hadn't felt such goosebumps over his body before. Chapter 2093 Corrupted Aura of Divinity. Du Qingyuan hurriedly raised her hands to clarify the situation. We didn't mean to disturb you. Du Qingyuan hurriedly raised her hands to clarify the situation. This isn't a place where you should have come to. But since you are already here, why don't you stay here to accompany me? The black skeleton crackled coldly as it raised its hand and pointed its finger toward the duo. Huala. In the next moment, Zhong Xian and Du Qingyuan felt as if the world was collapsing on them. An overwhelming pressure crushed down on them, leaving them feeling as though their bodies would be reduced to dust. This is the strength of the gods. Zhongxian was alarmed. Knowing that there was no time to waste on words, he took out the Tongzhang sword and executed his strongest swordsmanship. Huala. Through exerting his sword intent, he swiftly formed a fishnet barrier around him and Du Qingyuan to shoulder the pressure. As the fishnet tangled together with the finger of the black skeleton, the pressure crushing down on them alleviated significantly. Your swordsmanship is decent. Are you from the sky of heavenly sword? The black skeleton halted its attack and asked. But a moment later, it shook its head and answered its own question. That doesn't seem right. It should be impossible to find someone from the sword god heaven here. Furthermore, their swordsmanship is known to be sharp and ferocious, carrying great determination and tenacity. As a result of that, their attacks tend to be tough and unbending. On the other hand, your sword seems to extremely sentimental, a very different nature from that of the sky of heavenly sword. To be able to comprehend such a powerful move in a place that is so direly lacking in spiritual energy, you are indeed extremely talented, just like the previous person who last ascended to the firmament from here. But that's all there is to it. The tomb of my master is not a place where outsiders can enter and leave freely. However, in view that it wasn't easy for you to cultivate to your current level, I'll make an exception and spare you if you leave right now. The black skeleton waved its hand dismissively. Elder, we came here to search for the aura of divinity in order to reach the level of the deities. I implore you to accede to our requests. Seeing that the black skeleton had finally halted its attack, Zhongxian hurriedly lowered his posture and made his request. This was likely to be the only place on the Forsaken Continent where he could find the aura of divinity. So, despite the dangers, he couldn't back down here so easily. Do you wish to die? If not, scram. The black skeleton harumphed coldly. Elder. Zhongxian was just about to speak up again when the black skeleton waved its hands impatiently, inducing a burst of energy to surge outward like a massive tsunami. Zhongxian's face immediately turned livid. It felt as if everything was caving in on him. He quickly took out all of the semi-divinity artifacts he had acquired from the treasure vault of the ethereal hall previously to fend against the impact. Ding 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 ding. The collision still knocked Zhongxian back as blood spurted from his mouth. He crashed heavily onto the floor. At the same time, the semi-divinity artifacts he had in hand also fell powerlessly to the ground as well. He quickly drove his Heaven's Path Shenqi in order to recover a little as he endured the sharp pain his body was under and rose to his feet. I really have no intention of offending you, Elder. However, we are in dire need of the aura of divinity. Zhongxian said. You really are pushing your luck, aren't you? The black skeleton spat coldly. In the next moment, Zhongxian felt yet another powerful pressure pressing down on him from above, attempting to crush him into a pancake. Just as he was about to reach his limits, the crimson pendant he hung in front of his chest suddenly grew warm, and the heavy pressure also alleviated simultaneously as well. Who? Sensing that the power of the pendant had dispelled the pressure, Zhongxian was about to make use of this opportunity to try convincing the black skeleton once more when he suddenly felt tension around his neck. Before he could even react, the crimson pendant was already flying toward the hands of the black skeleton. Return it to me. Shocked, Zhongxian immediately dashed forward to retrieve his pendant. However, there seemed to be some kind of force holding him in place, preventing him from moving at all. Dangling the crimson pendant right in front of its empty eye sockets, the black skeleton examined it closely for a moment before flicking it back toward Zhongxian's chest. Who? The binding on his body vanished, and Zhongxian immediately panted heavily for breath. With a cold yet no longer hostile voice, the black skeleton looked at Zhongxian and asked, You mentioned that you require the aura of divinity. Sensing the change in the attitude of the black skeleton after examining the crimson pendant, Zhongxian realized that there was a chance that things might work out. So, he quickly clasped his fist and replied, Yes, Elder. I hope that you can accede to my requests. I don't have any aura of divinity. However, this can replace it. With a grasp of his hand, the air of degeneration swiftly gathered around the black skeleton. Under the might of some sort of power, the air of degeneration swiftly condensed together to form a black current around the black skeleton. This sight left Zhong Xian a little taken aback. He could sense that the black current was much purer and more refined than the air of degeneration. In fact, it emanated an inviolable pressure that was strikingly similar to the aura of divinity he had encountered previously. The only difference was that the aura of divinity was golden in color and it didn't carry the property of degeneration. If Zhong Xian were to be afflicted with even a hint of the black current, even with the little chick's chicken soup, there was still a good chance that he would be corroded down to his bones. I don't think that I'll be able to use the aura of divinity that you have produced. Zhong Xian pointed it out hesitantly. If he were to dare assimilate it, the chances were that he would be dead before he could even raise his cultivation. I know what you are getting at. The aura of divinity is originally golden in color, but it takes on a different form in this world, the black skeleton said. A different form? Zhong Xian was perplexed. The spiritual energy in this world is too murky and impure. With the passing of time, the aura of divinity would become corrupted, losing its golden glow, the black skeleton explained with a shake of its head. Similar to how the spiritual energy on the azure was far purer and more refined than that of the master-teacher continent, it was likely that the situation was similar for the firmament and the azure as well. The incredibly pure aura of divinity, when placed in an area that was far more impure than it, would eventually become corrupted and turn into the air of degeneration. Zhong Xian's complexion darkened. He thought that he would be able to find pure aura of divinity here, but if it had all turned into air of degeneration, it would be useless even if he acquired it. There was no way he could assimilate it, let alone use it to make a breakthrough. Elder, is there a way to cleanse the corrupted aura of divinity? Zhong Xian asked. He had to find a way to make things work out over here. Otherwise, not only would he be unable to find Luo Ruoxin, the fake Kong Shi might even tear the library of Heaven's Path out of his body, thus resulting in his death. And he knew that the next victim after him would likely be his direct disciples and the rest of the 6 sects. It was not as if he didn't have other strategies that he could resort to, but those were the final measures. It would really be a desperate battle for survival then. In order to everything going down in the worst possible situation, he had to become a god at any cost. There's a way to do it, but it won't be easy, the black skeleton said. Hearing that there was a way out, Zhong Xian heaved a sigh of relief on the inside as he hurriedly asked, Elder, I beseech you to enlighten me. A ritual that utilizes the power of souls can cleanse the aura of divinity. However, it'll require many wills to be united as one, earnestly wishing for it to happen. If there's even a single will that isn't aligned with the rest, it will end in failure, the black skeleton said. Elder, please impart to me the procedures of the ritual. Zhong Xian heaved a sigh of relief and said. Yuan, the black skeleton raised its finger and tapped forward lightly. Who? A sliver of its will was infused right into Zhong Xian and Du Qingyuan's minds. This. Upon seeing the content of the will, Zhong Xian's eyebrows shot up. Just as what the black skeleton said, the ritual would require many people working in unison to complete. Furthermore, the chances were extremely high that sacrifices would be required. The act of cleansing aura of divinity is a necessary step to becoming a god. This step poses no difficulty if it's conducted in the firmament, but over here, it's no different from trying to overstep the authority of the heavens. So, it's only normal that someone will have to suffer divine retribution for it. If you think you are able to do it, you can give it a try. Otherwise, I have no alternative solutions for you either, the black skeleton said. With a tap of its finger, it sent a sphere of black energy right toward Zhong Xian. Zhong Xian carefully caught the sphere of black energy with his zhenqi before sealing it within a jade bottle. That's all I have for you. Do not disrupt my rest anymore. I don't care whether you are from the sky of heavenly sword or sky of freedom, but if you dare step into this area once more, don't expect me to show mercy to you. The black skeleton sat down on the ground before falling completely still. Zhong Xian stashed the jade bottle into his storage ring before bowing deeply to the black skeleton. Thank you, Elder. Even though the other party didn't have the golden aura of divinity he wanted, the other party did provide him with a sliver of hope and a clear direction. As long as he did what the other party said, there was a chance that things might just work out. Can I swallow that black skeleton whole? Just as Zhongxian and Du Qingyuan were about to leave, Little Chick, who was in the tamed beast sack, suddenly spoke out. "Don't utter nonsense." Zhongxian nearly fainted upon hearing those words. Till now, the little yellow chick's cultivation was still stagnated at heavenly high immortal realm. Given that it hadn't even reached semi-divinity realm, how could it possibly devour a real god whole? Wasn't that practically daydreaming? Furthermore, even though the black skeleton was hostile at first, it provided him with a way out of the quandary he was in. "TSK, stingy." Little Chick murmured in displeasure as it continued to peck at its premier immortal pills. After dealing with Little Chick, Zhongxian began walking in the direction from where he came from when a thought suddenly came to his mind. He took out his pendant and clasped his fist toward the black skeleton. "Pardon me for bothering you, but I would just like to ask one last question. Elder, do you know of the origin of this pendant?" Chapter 2094 100,000 True Immortals 1:2094 100,000 True Immortals 1. He had noticed that the black skeleton mentioned something about the sky of heavenly sword and sky of freedom, and even though he didn't understand what those words meant, he was certain that it had something to do with the firmament. Furthermore, the black skeleton had initially intended to harm them, but after seeing the crimson pendant he was wearing, its attitude suddenly changed. This meant that it was able to recognize the crimson pendant, and there was a good chance that it was acquainted with Luo Ruoxin. However, the black skeleton stood unmovingly on the spot, not responding at all, knowing that the black skeleton wasn't going to answer any of his questions even if he were to probe further. Zhongxian shook his head before retreating from the area. Together with Du Qingyuan, they headed back in the direction where they came from. With a slight moment of disorientation, they soon reappeared above the altar. "Let's return." Even though the aura of divinity he had obtained was impure, there was still a chance he could cleanse it through the ritual the black skeleton had passed down to them. Within 4 hours, they were back at the Starchaser Palace once more. Han Jianqiu and the others were pacing around the room anxiously when Zhongxian and Du Qingyuan returned, and they immediately directed anticipatory gazes over. "Wu Chen, prepare the altar," Zhongxian instructed as he imparted the ritual process to him. After looking through the ritual process, a tight frown appeared on Wu Chen's forehead. "I'm afraid that it won't be easy for the ritual to succeed." "What does the ritual require?" Han Jianqiu asked. "The ritual requires the participation of 100,000 true immortal realm cultivators. They must bear open their souls and display not the slightest resistance at all," Wu Chen replied with a shake of his head. Bearing open one's soul required a bold leap of faith, as it would mean making one completely vulnerable before others. It was no different from entrusting one's life into the hands of another. If anyone in the formation were to harbor any malicious intention toward them, that could spell the end of them. Even though Zhongxian was the head of 4 sects, the idol of countless young men in the Forsaken Continent, he didn't possess the influence to convince so many people to go to that extent for him. No human was truly selfless, let alone 100,000 of them. "I know that it isn't easy, but we still have to give it a try," Zhongxian replied solemnly. He turned his eyes toward where Han Jianqiu, Kue Xiao, and Qin Yuan were and asked, "Are the disciples and elders of the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion, 7-Star Pavilion, and Myriad Beasts Hall here yet?" When the grudge between him and the fake Kong Shi was first brought to the surface, Zhongxian immediately instructed Han Jianqiu and the others to gather all of the disciples and elders of their respective sects on Starchaser Island. He knew that they would require as much power as possible in order to deal with the powerful ethereal hall and Kong Shi. A month had passed since then, so they should have arrived by now. "They have all arrived, and they are ready to move at your command," Han Jianqiu replied. "However, we are only able to gather 20,000 cultivators of true immortal realm and above." The greatest problem for them at the moment wasn't whether they could unite the hearts of 100,000 cultivators together, but that they couldn't even gather that many true immortals together. The 4 sects had many experts in their ranks, but there were only so many of them who were able to reach true immortal realm. One must know that those who wielded such strength were already qualified to become a core disciple or elder of their respective sects. Despite the several thousand years of heritage of the 6 sects, even when factoring all of their subordinate and hidden powers, they were only able to gather 20,000 true immortals together. Given so, it was unlikely that they would be able to meet the requirement of the participation of 100,000 true immortal realm cultivators in the ritual. In fact, it was a question whether there were even that many true immortals on the Forsaken Continent or not. 20,000 true immortals? Zhong Xian's face darkened. It hadn't been long since he and Wu Chen arrived on the Forsaken Continent, so their understanding of it was still slightly lacking. They were too caught up with worrying over how they could unite everyone's will together that they neglected the most important problem that stood in their path: where in the world were they going to find 100,000 true immortals? One must know that the true immortals on the Azure were similar to the great sages on the Master-Teacher continent. The only reason why Zhong Xian was able to encounter so many of them was because he was constantly in contact with the 6 sects, where the top experts of the Forsaken Continent congregated. It was already difficult enough to find and rally 20,000 of them together, let alone 100,000. Sect leader Zhong, bad news. While the crowd was frowning deeply for a solution, Elder Zhao Yu suddenly barged into the room with a panicked look on her face. Zhong Xian's eyes glanced over. Countless beasts have suddenly appeared around Starchaser Island. I fear that it'll be hard for us to fend them off even with our current strength. Elder Zhao Yu exclaimed anxiously. Beasts? Zhong Xian was taken aback by the sudden announcement. He quickly headed out of the hall with Du Qingyuan and the others, only to see that the water and air around Starchaser Island had been completely filled up by beasts of varying sizes. Crabs, clams, squids, fishes, lobsters, sea urchins. I'm hungry, little chick, who appeared suddenly atop of Zhong Xian's shoulders, gulped down a mouthful of saliva and murmured. Zhong Xian. This was really bad timing. There were far more enemies than he had expected, severely outnumbering even their forces. It was reassuring that those beasts had no semi-divinity realm cultivators amidst them, which placed them in an advantageous position. However, if they were to fight those beasts right now, they would be winning the battle but losing the war. Given the precarious situation they were already in, they couldn't afford to be weakened any further. Master, I have gathered all of the aquatic creatures who are capable of battle here. Just as Zhong Xian was trying to discern the purpose of these beasts, 3 massive sharks and a humongous tortoise suddenly flew out from the depths of the ocean. They were Zhong Xian's tamed beast. Seeing this sight, Zhong Xian patted his heart in relief as he suddenly recalled something. He had also instructed the 4 of them to rally all of the powerful aquatic creatures together at Starchaser Island in order to deal with the hostility of Kong Shi and the Hall of Gods. It was just that he got too caught up with the matters he had on hand that it slipped his mind. This is perfect timing. Zhong Xian's eyes lit up as he nearly burst into laughter out of joy. He was still troubled over how he could gather 100,000 true immortals together in one place when these aquatic creatures appeared. Perhaps, they might just be able to meet the requirement of 100,000 true immortals like that. With such thoughts in mind, he looked at Shark One and asked, "How many aquatic beasts are of true immortal realm and above here?" "Master, we have roughly 40,000 aquatic beasts who are of true immortal realm and above," Shark One replied. "Only 40,000? Zhong Xian frowned. To be fair, this was already plenty amazing. After all, the 4 sects only had around 20,000 true immortals in total. It was no wonder why the aquatic creatures dared to band together to overthrow the dominance of the 6 sects. Just the sheer number of true immortal realm experts they had was enough to crush any single one of the 6 sects. However, that only added the number of true immortal realm cultivators they had to 60,000. They were still far from their goal of 100,000. We still don't have enough people. Where else can we find more true immortal realm cultivators? Wu Chen asked. This is indeed a huge problem. Zhong Xian nodded in agreement. He contemplated with a deep frown on his face for a while before passing down a new instruction: gather everyone whose cultivation has reached pseudo-immortal realm in the 4 sects and the ocean of exiled stars here. Yes. Even though they had no idea what Zhong Xian was up to, Han Zhenqiu and the others still carried out his orders immediately. 2 hours later, many more cultivators and aquatic creatures appeared in the vicinity of Starchaser Island. We were able to gather another 200,000 pseudo-immortal realm cultivators and 400,000 pseudo-immortal realm beasts. Around 80,000 of them are at heavenly pseudo-immortal realm. Han Jianqiu walked up to Zhongxian and reported the current numbers. 80,000 of them? Zhongxian nodded. It would have been good if there were more of them, but I can work with this number too. Not knowing what Zhongxian was up to, Han Jianqiu looked at him with a confused look on his face as he asked, "Teacher, what's your reason for gathering so many pseudo-immortal realm cultivators here as well? Is there anything we need to do to help?" "Yes. I need you to bring 100,000 formation flags to me as soon as possible," Zhongxian replied. 100,000 formation flags? Han Jianqiu was astonished. He turned to Elder Kuei Xiao and said, "Our sect doesn't have the ability to gather that many formation flags within a short period of time. Seems like we'll have to count on your 7-star pavilion for this." "Of course, this isn't a problem at all." Elder Kuei Xiao chuckled confidently. He quickly took out a communication jade token and passed down an order. Not too long later, he brought a storage ring to Zhongxian and said, "Teacher, here are the 100,000 formation flags you require." Tapping into the 7-star pavilion's resources and channels, it wasn't too difficult for Kuei Xiao to gather 100,000 formation flags swiftly. "You have my gratitude." Given that the entire Forsaken Continent was in danger, it would be pointless to harp too much on formalities at this point in time. Zhongxian grabbed the storage ring and leaped into the sky. He ascended for over 10,000 meters before coming to a halt. He flicked his wrist. Hula! 100,000 formation flags materialized in the air around him. With a wave of his hand, they swiftly descended to the ground, creating the bizarre sight of raining flags. This. Han Jianqiu and the others were stunned speechless by what they were seeing. The same went for the aquatic creatures and the disciples of the 4 sects too. Usually, most formation masters would plant a formation flag at a time to set up their formation, but even so, there was a huge chance that there would be some kind of deviation in the setup which they would have to slowly identify and correct later on. A person who could plant 10 formation flags simultaneously was worthy of being called a formation grandmaster. Similarly, a person who could plant 20 formation flags at once was known as a formation grandmaster. And Zhongxian was a person who had just planted 100,000 formation flags at once. This was one of the few happenings in life that filled one with incredulity, prompting one to wonder if one was dreaming. It was something that none of them dared imagine to be possible. Even the most talented formation master of the Forsaken Continent would have never been unable to pull off such a feat. Let me see what kind of formation it is. If it's a simple formation, it might still be plausible to pull off something like this. Amidst the crowd, an elder who was skilled in formations mumbled to himself. As the elder, the formation flags fell into the ground and the ocean. Then, the young man in the air stomped his foot lightly. Wang! The formation immediately came to life. A shimmering light of 7 colors began to ripple in the surroundings, causing the surroundings to reflect the iridescence of bubbles. It's the 7-colored spirit-locking formation, one of the top formations of the Forsaken Continent. Not only so, it appears that there are spirit-gathering formation, heart-calming formation, and many other formations compounded over it. There must at least be dozens of formations stacked over one another. He actually managed to set up such a massive compound formation in an instant. The word that should be used to describe everyone's emotions was not shock but horror. The difficulty in setting up a compound formation was much greater than that of setting up an ordinary formation. Attempting to compound 2 formations together would already increase the difficulty of the process by manyfold, but Zhongxian actually set up a compound formation of dozens of layers, spanning over a distance of hundreds of li in an instant. It was an ability that had surpassed their imagination. It seems to be an ability which only gods are capable of pulling off. Du Qingyuan muttered to herself with widened eyes. She thought she was already deeply in awe with the young man's capabilities, but the sight before him still rendered her incapable of words. It was no wonder why the young man was able to win the fancy of the spirit god. He was indeed an extraordinary individual. Above the air, Zhongxian was starting to feel a little fatigued after setting up and activating the formation. Even though he made it seem as if he had pulled it off easily, setting up such a massive and complex formation still took its toll on him. If not for the fact that he had comprehended pathos of heavens and had reached semi-divinity realm, he would have depleted himself dry before he could fully activate the formation and plummeted from the sky. He quietly gasped for air as he drove his heaven's path Zhenqi to swiftly replenish his energy. After he had recovered a fair degree, he stepped into the formation and flicked his wrist. Over a dozen semi-divinity realm corpses appeared around him in an instant. They were from the headquarters of the ethereal hall. "Disintegrate," Zhongxian said with a snap of his fingers. Peng 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 peng. The dozen corpses immediately burst apart. Different from an explosion though, the diffusion of energy was controlled. The shockwave induced wasn't enough to hurt any of the cultivators present in the area. TZZZZZ. In just a few moments, the dozen semi-divinity realm cultivators had already fully released the power from their cultivation, filling the massive formation with energy. Wu Chen had no idea whether Kongsha had lectured 80,000 people at once during his era, but this was definitely the first time he was witnessing such a grand sight. Simple yet profound words dissolved amidst the spiritual energy and descended from the sky, surging into the bodies of each and every cultivator. The crowd grew more and more excited as they savored every single word Zhongxian said. Agitation gripped their bodies as they trembled wildly. Most aquatic creatures thought that the lecture would be meaningless to them as their physical constitution was vastly different from that of the humans. Yet, after listening for a short moment, they felt a shiver running down their spine as their pores and meridians opened wide to accept an influx of spiritual energy. What Zhongxian had lectured wasn't a cultivation technique but a set of principles that deconstructed and deciphered the hurdle that stood between a pseudo-immortal and a true immortal. It was an absolute logic of the world. Through understanding and overcoming every single aspect of the hurdle, any life form would eventually be able to make a breakthrough to true immortal realm. Flower claws. This was the name of a certain crawfish amidst the crowd. Its name originated from the colorful pair of claws it was born with. It had been several decades since flower claws reached heavenly pseudo-immortal realm, but an accident had caused the foundation of its cultivation to stumble. Ever since then, it hadn't been able to push its cultivation any further. The person who had hurt it back then was a true immortal realm disciple of the 6 sects. Back then, that darned fellow and his gang tried to capture it so as to braise it with spicy mala paste, but it managed to slip away. However, it had sustained severe injuries in the midst of doing so. It lost a claw, and several of its meridians snapped. It was already a miracle that it was able to maintain its current level of cultivation. Not too long ago, the 3 kings rallied all of them together at Starchaser Island. It was thinking that this was the opportune moment to cut that darned disciple into multiple slices and cook him in curry. But before it could even find that fellow, the master of 3 kings suddenly began on a lecture. It didn't pay any heed to the lecture initially as it knew that there was no way it would be able to further its cultivation given its current state. But after listening for a while, its shell suddenly began glowing crimson as spiritual energy surged into its body. Before it knew it, its cultivation was rising like crazy. Hong Long. True immortal realm. I made a breakthrough. Flower Claws broke down in tears. I won't have to live in fear of getting captured and being made its spicy mala crawfish anymore. With its cultivation reaching true immortal realm, it finally had the ability to protect itself. Since he's the master of the 3 kings, he's also the master of Flower Claws as well. From this day onward, I shall pledge my loyalty to him. Even if he tries to kill me and braise me with onion, I'll accept my fate. The little crawfish looked at the figure floating in the sky as it made up its mind. The same scene was happening amongst the other aquatic creatures too. Flower clams, scallops, oysters, razor shells. All of them managed to make a breakthrough too. I am hungry, Yui. Little Chick murmured as it looked at the aquatic creatures with saliva dripping from its lips. Amazing. In less than an hour, more than half of those who were at heavenly pseudo-immortal realm previously had already made a breakthrough. Han Jianqiu and the others were shocked beyond words. This ability to induce improvement in other cultivators was truly terrifying. A single lecture actually allowed more than 40,000 heavenly pseudo-immortals to make a breakthrough to true immortal realm. This was a feat that they would dare not imagine to be possible, but it was really happening right before their eyes. Seeing that he had finally reached the required amount, Zhongxian heaved a sigh of relief. Forcefully enduring his current exhaustion, he passed down an order. "All right, gather all of those who have managed to make a breakthrough together with the other true immortals. Wu Chen, prepare the altar. We'll be holding the ritual soon." The Zhongxi of semi-divinity realm cultivators was extremely pure, such that even absorbing a sliver of it was enough for a heavenly pseudo-immortal to make a breakthrough. Furthermore, he had used over a dozen semi-divinity realm corpses for this and further refined and mediated the energy released through the formation. Given the extent Zhongxian had gone to for this, it would be difficult for the heavenly pseudo-immortals to not make a breakthrough. Of course, Zhongxian's impartation also played a vital role as well. Even if those heavenly pseudo-immortals had accumulated sufficient energy, it would still take most of them at least several years to make a breakthrough. The lecture reduced this lengthy duration to just a mere hour. More importantly, he had also won the loyalty of these 40,000 cultivators through this as well. Zhongxian quickly immersed his cultivation into the great codex of spring and autumn to recover from his previous exertion. Nevertheless, it still took him a few minutes to recover. Within this period of time, Han Zhenqiu and the others had finished gathering all of the true immortal realm cultivators, and Wu Chen had also finished preparing the altar for the ritual too. "Let's begin." Even though all preparations were complete, Zhongxian was in no rush to carry out the ritual. Instead, still floating in midair, he began carrying out another lecture. "What I want to talk about now is the way to practice battle techniques. If he wished to unite the hearts of everyone together, he would have to first win their respect. Regarding that, he could think of no other ways than to impart his knowledge to them. If he could win their earnest gratitude, they would likely be more willing to help him cleanse the aura of divinity of its corruption. The way to practice battle techniques. Having witnessed the miracle Zhongxian had pulled off earlier, the crowd immediately pricked up their ears upon hearing his words. Anticipation and excitement could be felt in the atmosphere. The key to battle techniques lie in. Seeing that he had managed to gather everyone's attention, Zhongxian smiled a little before beginning on his lecture. Every single word he spoke seemed to linger in the surroundings, filling the air with a peculiar yet natural vibe. It was the feeling of resonance with the world, the harmony with nature and one's surroundings. "Don't you think that it's too late to only start raising your fighting prowess now?" A dissonant voice suddenly broke the atmosphere. The sky shivered as a silhouette warped into existence before everyone's eyes. It was a person dressed in a flowing robe. He had a tall stature, and there was a hint of benevolence between his eyebrows. "You." Zhongxian narrowed his eyes. He halted his lecture and stood up. The person before him was no other than the man who had vanished after stealing the aura of divinity from him, Kongsha. Kongsha's aura seemed to have vanished completely, or to be more exact, he had managed to conceal it entirely within him, making it impossible to gauge the depth of his cultivation. However, his eyes still remained sharp as ever, inducing a feeling of helplessness in those facing him. There could only be a single possibility behind this. Kongsha had managed to reach the level of the gods. Crawfishes are extremely popular in China, though they can also be extremely resilient at times. Chapter 2096 Precarious Predicament Protect the Sect Leader. Han Zhenqiu cried out. The high immortals from the four sects and the aquatic creatures swiftly rose into the air and stood between Zhongxian and Kongsha, forming a resolute wall. Futile. Kongsha harumphed coldly as he raised his hand. Voila. Many experts walked out from the warped space behind him. There were two notable figures among the group, namely Citadel Lord Bai Xuansheng from the Black Mirror Citadel and sect leader Jiyu Zhueyun from the Evanescent Immortal sect. On top of that, there were several hundred high immortals as well. It was a force that could stand against the allied armies of the four sects and the aquatic creatures. They are the high immortals of the other two sects and the ethereal hall. Everyone felt their hearts tightening a little. The ethereal hall had remained at the top of the continent for the past several thousand years. Considering how they had over 20 semi-divinity realm experts, it did not come as a surprise that they had over 500 high immortals. Adding in the high immortals from the other two sects, it formed a frightening force that should not be underestimated. After bringing out his army, Kongsha completely disregarded Han Jianqiu and everyone else, focusing his eyes only on Zhongxian. With a slight curl of his lips, he remarked, "You must have been eagerly waiting for me to have even prepared an altar here." His next goal after reaching the level of the gods was to steal the heaven's imperfection within Zhongxian. With his current strength, he could resort to other means to extract the fragment of the heavens, but it would take a huge toll on his body. Things would be much simpler if he had the altar with him. Han Jianqiu, you'll be leading all of the experts of the high immortal realm and above to defend against them. As for the rest of you, we'll be continuing with the lecture, Zhongxian bellowed. After that, he turned to the 100,000 true immortal realm cultivators beneath and continued. The crux of battle techniques. His voice was steady and unhurried. Despite the clashes occurring behind him, the true immortals found their state of mind slowly calming down as they listened to his words. Zhongxian knew that this decision he made would surely result in massive casualties. There was no one present who stood a chance at subduing Kongsha other than him, so the only way to buy time was through piling up sacrifices. But he had no other choice. He could tell that he would not be a match for Kongsha in his current state. If they fought as they were, everything would be over. Thus, he could only carry the burden of this decision and push on. Choosing to disregard me, eh? Those who are chosen by the heavens sure are conceited. Kongsha's face darkened as he spat coldly. Boom. With a raise of his hand, Bai Xianxing, Jiyu Zhueyun, and the few remaining semi-divinities of the Hall of Gods charged forward. The High Immortals also made their move. "Protect our sect leader," Han Jianqiu cried out as he stepped forward to face the enemy. Driving the god's sword intent, he filled the sky above him with a barrage of sword chi. Just like that, semi-divinities clashed with semi-divinities while high immortals clashed with high immortals. It was a full-blown war where both sides were determined to tear each other apart. In just a few breaths after the battle began, high immortals began dying one after another, causing corpses to rain from the sky. The lofty and elusive high immortals of the Forsaken Continent were swiftly dying one after another like ordinary mortals. In terms of the number of experts, the four sects and the aquatic creatures paled in comparison to the Black Mirror Citadel, Evanescent Immortal Sect, and Ethereal Hall. However, in terms of individual fighting prowess, the four sects clearly had an advantage. As a result, both sides turned out to be equally matched for the time being. The scales did not seem to be leaning toward anyone yet. For our sect leader. For our great continent. The ex-first core disciple of the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion, He Jingxian, charged toward the enemies. Ever since Bai Ruanqing surpassed him after acknowledging Zhongxian as her teacher, he had been cultivating desperately. Even though his cultivation was still only at the heavenly true immortal realm, his fighting prowess was already comparable to most high immortals. Kill one, and the scales are balanced. Kill two, and we would have made a gain. Another one of the core disciples, Liu Yulian, flew forth as she roared furiously, forming a stark contrast to her usual gentle demeanor. For the master of the three kings, the crabs, crawfish, and other aquatic creatures charged forth, too. Their fighting prowess was greatly reduced while they were out of the water, but their numbers made up for that disadvantage. Furthermore, most of them had hard shells that granted them natural protection. With both sides nearly equally matched, it was bound to be a long and gruesome battle. It's our turn. Paying no heed to the slaughter behind, Kongsha took a step forward and covered dozens of li in an instant. Before anyone could react, he was already standing right above Zhongxian. But the next moment, the formation that was made up of 100,000 formation flags released a slight buzz as a massive barrier of light formed around Zhongxian and the 100,000 true immortals. The formation was built not just to prevent spiritual energy from leaking into the atmosphere but to protect those within it as well. Even semi-divinity realm cultivators would not be able to breach it easily. Who? With a slight flick of his finger, Kongsha ripped a hole in the barrier and stepped in. The barrier could not stop him for even a second. Upon entering the formation, he quietly directed his glance at the altar. This simple gesture immediately caused Wu Chen to lose control of the altar. It began to shake wildly, as if it would fly toward Kongshe at any moment. Wu Chen immediately bit his finger and splattered his blood all over the altar. Tzzzzzzzzzzzz. The trembling altar began to calm down under the tribute of the blood. It was still shaking a fair bit, but it was not as intense as before. Palace Master Du, I need your help. Wu Chen cried out with a pale face. Du Qingyuan, who was fighting a few high immortals, swiftly got rid of her opponents and rushed over to the altar to infuse her zhenqi into it. Only then did the altar finally stop shaking altogether. Paying no heed to this, Kongshe turned to Zhongxian and said, "Do you want to take it out yourself, or do I have to do the work personally? Know that things will not end simply if I have to make a move." Voila! Even though it looked as if Kongshe was not doing anything, Zhongxian suddenly felt the space around him hardening, forming a barrier that trapped him, leaving him unable to escape. Despite so, Zhongxian continued with his lecture as if nothing had happened. Even as Kongshe breached the barrier, attempted to steal the altar, and made a move on him, his voice had never stopped at any point in time. The 100,000 true immortals were still completely immersed in his lecture, to the point that they did not seem to have realized that danger was already unbelievably close to them. Impartation of heaven's will, simple words of profound wisdom. Trickery that beguiles the hearts of others and fools one into subservience. That was always the method he preferred and specialized in, and you seem to be pretty skilled in it as well. However, it's all too late, Kongshe sneered as he raised his palm against Zhongxian. Protect the sect leader. Horrified, Wu Chen and Du Qingyuan immediately rose up to protect him, but the next instant, several bursts of light gushed forth to block Kongshe's path. If you wish to hurt our teacher, you'll have to step over our dead bodies. The sheer might behind the attack of the 11 youths caused even the sky to tear apart. They were Zhao Ya, Zheng Yang, and the others. Zhongxian's 11 direct disciples had all reached the semi-divinity realm, and they were all wielding the semi-divinity artifacts that their teacher had given them. Through their sharp coordination, they were able to defend against Kongshe's palm strike. Wu Chen, begin the ritual. Zhongxian bellowed. With a flick of his finger, the aura of divinity that he had acquired from the city of collapsed space swiftly fell on top of the altar. O noble gods, I, Wu Chen, humbly offer the earnest loyalty and faith of 100,000 souls to plead for the purification of the aura of divinity. Two voices echoed in unison, Wu Chen and Du Qingyuan. One standing on the left of the altar and the other standing on the right, they raised their forefingers toward the heavens as they scattered their fresh blood over the altar. A brilliant light flickered into the surroundings as immense spiritual energy swiftly embraced all of the 100,000 true immortals. Xiong xiong. A light yellow flame ignited above the altar, searing the black aura of divinity. However, nothing seemed to be happening to the black aura of divinity at all. Not all of the 100,000 true immortals have opened themselves fully yet, Du Qingyuan said with gritted teeth. The flame must turn golden before it's able to cleanse the aura of divinity of its degeneration properties. Having been imparted with the ritual procedures, she knew the conditions required for success. Only when the wills of all 100,000 true immortals were aligned together would the flame on the altar turn golden. The current light yellow flame indicated that those whose wills were aligned together only numbered half. If only I had more time to lecture them, Zhongxian remarked with a shake of his head. Of the 100,000 true immortals, only 50,000 of them were with him, and that included the 40,000 heavenly pseudo-immortals who had achieved a breakthrough earlier. It was not that his lecture did not appeal to them, but the time that he had with them was simply too short. Trust and credibility needed time to nurture. Even with a bond as deep as one between a parent and a child, if it was not nourished with care, concern, and accompaniment, their relationship would only remain shallow. This was even truer for the ties between a teacher and a student. The bond between a teacher and a student could run extremely deep, but it had to be carefully nurtured over time. That was the one thing that Zhongxian lacked the most at the moment. If he had just an hour more, he would not have been in such a predicament. Is that the aura of divinity from the city of collapsed space? That darned black skeleton actually gave it to you? That be asterisk starred. Why? Why? Kong Shi, who was fighting against Zhao Ya and the others, noticed the happenings below as well and swiftly figured out Zhongxian's goal. His eyes reddened in fury. As someone who had lived for several thousand years, he knew the secrets behind the city of collapsed space. In fact, he had entered the area himself and obtained a certain medicinal herb. Following which, several things had happened. In the 2 times he ventured into the depths of the city of collapsed space, he had encountered a black skeleton. However, that black skeleton had been extremely hostile to him, never hesitating to attack him. Putting aside acquiring the aura of divinity, he had nearly lost his life there. Due to that, he had been left with no choice but to trick Zhongxian into challenging the Hall of Gods and obtaining the aura of divinity on his behalf. Why? The world had hindered him for so long, but it allowed this young man to do everything that he was unable to. This was unjust. With a furious roar, Kong Shi pulled his palm down. This single strike was at least 2 times stronger than the palm strike before. It caused the formation to waver feebly as the surrounding space collapsed inward under the pressure. Block it! Zhao Ya cried out as she dealt out boundless sword qi to hold back Kong Shi's attack, like a pillar propping up the heavens. Zheng Yang also dashed forward and pressed his spear against the collapsing space, desperately pushing back the destruction. The same went for Wei Ruyan, Kong Shiyaro, Liu Yang, Wang Ying, Dan Xiaotian, Lu Chong, Bai Wanqing, Zhong Zhouxiao, and Yuan Dao. His 11 direct disciples had no fear despite the danger they were in. Driving their strength to the limits, they were able to barely maintain the stability of the space despite destruction caving in relentlessly on them. They won't be able to hold on for too long. Concentrate. Seeing that Wu Chen had halted out of shock, Zhongxian sent an urgent telepathic message to him as he carried on with his lecture. As the lecture continued, the color of the yellow flame on the altar grew deeper and deeper, gradually making the transformation toward golden. Young master, we'll still need at least 15 more minutes in order to achieve perfect unity of wills at this rate. I fear that they won't be able to hold on for that long, Wu Chen said nervously. The yellow flame was already changing at a rapid pace, but it did not seem like they would be able to make it in time. Given the strength and undying tenacity of Zhao Ya and the others, they were still able to hold on for several breaths against the overwhelmingly powerful Kong Shi, but for them to last 15 minutes. That was simply too difficult. No, it would be more accurate to say that it was no different from hoping for a miracle to happen. I know that. But we can only try to persevere for as long as we can, Zhongxian replied grimly. The lecturing continued without a pause. The crowd beneath seemed to be completely oblivious to be living hell occurring around them. They continued driving their zhenqi ceaselessly as they deepened their understanding of battle techniques. Chapter 2097 The Casualty of War Catcher. The might behind Kong Shi's attack only continued to grow stronger with time. Eventually, it reached a point where it couldn't be stopped anymore. Dimension rifts began to breach the stable space as Zhao Ya and the others were jolted back violently, causing blood to spurt from their mouths. The encounter had inflicted considerable injuries on them. Kong Shi was already invincible in his own power class, let alone the fact that he had achieved a breakthrough to the level of the gods. As an existence that stood at the very peak of the azure, he was no longer someone whom Zhao Ya and the others could take on. Someone of your capabilities won't be able to cleanse the aura of divinity. It will be put to much better use in my hands. After sending Zhao Ya and the others flying, Kong Shi reached his hand out toward the altar. Knowing that there was no other choice for him but to join in the battle as well, Zhongxian whipped out the Tongshang sword and exerted his sword intent while his mouth continued moving so as to continue with his lecture. He had been trying to avoid making a move himself so as to avoid any possible situation where the lecture was interrupted. The ritual could fail if anything were to go wrong. However, given the current situation, he had no choice but to step up as well. A massive net appeared all over the sky, forming a massive barrier that blocked out Kong Shi's hand. If I hadn't made a breakthrough, this move of yours might have made me hesitate for a moment. But do you really think that your move will be able to stop the current me? Kongsha chuckled softly as he continued pressing his palm downward. Catcher. Cracks immediately appeared on the net. A heart of intertwined threads. This was a move that had surpassed the Heaven's Path sword art. It made him invincible amongst semi-divinity realm cultivators, and even ordinary gods might find themselves overwhelmed by it as well. But his opponent was no other than Kongsha. Having overcome the hurdle to godhood, the other party had acquired strength far beyond imagination. TSLA. A massive hole was ripped open in the net. With a pale face, Zhongxian skidded back several hundred meters before he was able to regain his footing. At the same time, a spurt of blood escaped from his mouth. In just a single encounter, he had already sustained severe injuries, but throughout the entire encounter, he carried on with his lecture as if nothing was happening at all. The 100,000 true immortals continued listening to his words without realizing that something was amiss. Come over. Kongsha turned his gaze toward the altar and beckoned. He knew that the aura of divinity was the key of the battle. Once he snatched it over, victory would be his to claim. The young man before him would be completely helpless before him by then. Hula. The black aura of divinity on the altar swiftly flew into Kongsha's hand. No. Wu Chen and Du Qingyuan cried out with pale faces as they leaped into the sky to retrieve the black aura of divinity. Peng. Peng. But with just a glance over from Kongsha, the two of them felt an enormous force crushing down on them, causing crimson blood to spurt from their mouths. Even though they had reached semi-divinity realm, their fighting prowess was far beneath Zhao Ya and the others. There was no way they could have possibly been a match for Kongsha. Ha ha ha. Now that the final hope you have been desperately clutching onto has fallen into my hand, let's see what else you are going to do. Kongsha burst into laughter as he looked at Zhongxian with eyes filled with ridicule. As long as Zhongxian was unable to reach the level of the gods like him, he would never be a match for him. With this, the battle was sealed. Did you think that I would have no way of curbing you just because I'm unable to make a breakthrough? A voice of utmost composure echoed alongside Zhongxian's lecture. A book suddenly materialized in midair, and it plunged down toward Kongsha at a frightening speed. The golden page. You do have it after all. However, did you think that I wouldn't be guarded against something that bastard has as well? Watching as the book above him grew larger and larger, Kongsha was slightly taken aback for a moment before a cold sneer formed on his lips. He raised his hand up and waved it lightly. Wang. A peculiar aura crept out and covered his entire body, and his presence abruptly vanished from the world. It was as if he had suddenly phased out from the world. Unable to sense Kongsha's presence, the golden page screeched to a halt. It was unable to find its target to attack. He possesses the discamate constitution of divination too, and he used a secret art on top of that to ensure that he leaped out of the jurisdiction of the heavens. As powerful as the golden page, it's futile if it can't land a clean blow. Zhongxian thought grimly. As powerful as the golden page was, there were some conditions required for it to strike. Furthermore, there was still some lag time before the golden page struck, thus allowing the opponent to prepare countermeasures beforehand. Given that Kongsha was aware of the existence and nature of the golden page, it wasn't too difficult for him to prepare a counter against it. What Kongsha did was to conceal his presence completely from the heavens, thus rendering the golden page incapable of finding him. You're underestimating me as well. I wouldn't prepare just a single trump card to go against the great Kongsha. Do you want to fathom a guess why I used the golden page on you even though I know that there's a high chance you knew of its existence? Zhongxian spoke with a calm smile while carrying on with the lecture. As those words were being spoken, the flames above the altar abruptly soared into the sky. A figure rose up swiftly with a sword in hand. It was Zhongxian's clone. He had hidden amidst the flames of the altar, waiting for the moment which Kongsha was distracted by the golden page to launch an assault. Puha! Kongsha was too guarded against Zhongxian and the golden page that he was caught off guard by the clone's appearance. In a moment of carelessness, he got stabbed in his palm, causing fresh blood to pour out. However, the sword pierce stopped right there. The clone found that he was unable to drive his attack any deeper in. The physical body of a god was simply too resilient. Despite the clone's superior strength, which was further enhanced by a semi-divinity artifact and the god's sword intent, he was only able to barely scrape Kongsha's skin. Even at the very best, it only dealt as much damage as a failed injection would. Ha ha ha. Remarkable. You were actually able to hurt me. It appears that it's not without reason that you were chosen by the heavens. But do you think that something of this caliber will really affect me, a god? Kongsha knocked the clone flying with a wave of his hand before turning to look at Zhongxian with an air of inviolability around him. Part of the reason why Zhongxian's scheme worked was because Kongsha allowed it so. He had already realized that something was amiss when Zhongxian's clone hadn't appeared on the battlefield all along. Despite knowing that there was a ploy, he hadn't bothered putting his guard up. That was because he knew all schemes would crumble before absolute strength. Will you be able to kill me even if I were to stand still on the spot and allow you to attack me freely? In the face of a real god, semi-divinities were not any more than ants. I don't deny that. This bit of injury probably means nothing to a god at all, but the aura of divinity in your hands might beg to differ. Zhongxian chuckled softly. Taken aback by those words, Kongsha lowered his head to take a look, only to see the black degeneration aura inside the aura of divinity surging swiftly into his wounds. His hand was rotting swiftly, causing it to take on a hideous form. You! Horrified, Kongsha hurriedly let go of the black aura of divinity in his hand, causing it to fall onto the altar once more. Even so, the black aura of divinity continued to release the black degeneration aura, which was naturally drawn to the wound in Kongsha's hand. The black aura of divinity was created by the black skeleton by compressing the air of degeneration in the city of collapsed space tightly together, so the concentration of the degeneration property within it was terrifyingly high. Putting aside a semi-divinity realm cultivator, even a true god would be vulnerable to it. Damn it! Kongsha cursed furiously as he released all of his energy to curb the black degeneration aura. With his newfound strength as a god, not even ordinary air of degeneration would have been able to faze him anymore. That led to him thinking that there was nothing that could threaten him in the Azure anymore, but such a line of thought clearly backfired against him. Peng! Feeling deeply humiliated, Kongsha charged toward Zhongxian. Even when plagued by the black degeneration aura, the strength he had at his disposal still far surpassed any existence on the Azure. Overwhelmed by rage, he thrust his palm forth with his full strength this time around. It was an attack so powerful that it ripped through the fabrics of space in the trajectory of its attack, causing a spatial quake. Voila! Overwhelming might descended right upon Zhongxian, but before it was able to seal his fate, a little yellow chick suddenly appeared before Kongsha. It widened its mouth to an unnatural degree and gobbled Kongsha whole. Boom boom boom! A huge lump could be seen in the little yellow chick's body, and it was moving around violently to break free. Hold on as long as you can, but don't hesitate to spit him out if you find yourself reaching your limit. Zhongxian said worriedly. This fellow had been able to swallow the massive blackback tortoise whole and render it powerless back then, which proved that its ability to devour was a special talent. However, the fact still remained that Little Chick was only at heavenly high immortal realm whereas Kongsha was a real god. Even when Kongsha was wounded, there was still a huge gap between the two of them. All Zhongxian hoped was for the little yellow chick to hold on for a while longer, till the 100,000 true immortals finally achieved the complete union of wills. One thing that was extremely fortunate was that a huge proportion of the black degeneration aura had been absorbed by Kongsha earlier on, causing the black aura of divinity to change from pitch black to a dark yellow color. It wasn't completely purified yet, but it was a major step forward. Previously, the altar had to turn completely golden in order for the cleansing to be completed, but given the current state of the aura of divinity, it would do even if the color were to just turn bright yellow. This meant that the time he needed had been greatly reduced. Nevertheless, it was still a question whether they could stall Kongsha for this long. Zhongxian channeled all of his focus into the lecture, greatly increasing the effects of the impartation of heaven's will. A nourishing atmosphere could be felt lingering in the area. Meanwhile, the little yellow chick's body was still moving around violently. It was apparent that Kongsha was trying to force his way out. Back then, The semi-divinity realm blackback tortoise nearly lost its life after being gobbled whole, but Kongsha was still able to move around vigorously after that. The strength of the gods was truly fearsome. Hurry up, hurry up. Knowing that the little yellow chick wouldn't be able to last for too long, Zhongxian stared at the aura of divinity above the altar with an anxious look on his face. Along with his lecture, the flame had slowly turned to a bright yellow color. At the same time, changes began to occur to the aura of divinity as well. A black aura was slowly being expelled from the aura of divinity, causing it to slowly turn from dark yellow to yellow, light yellow. It's almost there. Seeing the changes in color, Zhongxian knew that the ritual was finally working. His heart thumped wildly in excitement. All of a sudden, the space above him wavered. Hula! A sword sliced through the air, and right after, the stomach of the little yellow chick was split into two. An unkempt Kongsha wielding a sword stepped out from within, appearing before everyone's view once more. His face was completely distorted with rage. He turned his body around and slashed down on the little yellow chick frenziedly. Shua! 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 As cold flashes of light struck down on it, the head of the little yellow chick was lopped off, and its body was sliced in many pieces. Xiong xiong! As if that wasn't enough, he released a burst of flame that seared the little yellow chick's severed body into ashes. No. Everything happened so quickly that Zhongxian didn't even have any time to react. His body stiffened, and his mind nearly blanked out entirely in that instant. This couldn't be true. The little yellow chick was dead. This little yellow chick had been with him ever since his time at the master-teacher continent. Back then, it was still stuck in the form of a gourd. It was an unreliable glutton which had sabotaged him on many occasions. It was also incredibly lazy, often choosing to lie around in his dantian, refusing to come out no matter what happened. As a result, they had many conflicts with one another, and they often bickered as well. But even as he raged or rolled his eyes at that little yellow chick, before he knew it, it had already become an important figure in his life. He had never imagined that such a situation would ever happen. Even his clone might have been unable to piece itself back together after it was reduced to such a state. You bastard, I'm going to slaughter you. Zhongxian's eyes turned red. Chapter 2098 Camaraderie of Brothers. Little Chick was his tamed beast, but it was also a friend and a brother. The two of them had been together with one another after having entered the Azure together. Unknowingly, the occasions which they teased one another and the interactions between them, all of these had become a natural part of his life. Even though they did not share a bond of blood, they had become as close as kin to one another. This was especially so after they formed a contract with one another. He could sense its thoughts and emotions, creating a feeling of unprecedented intimacy. The realization that those days would never return left him with a deep feeling of emptiness inside. He was initially opposed to letting Little Chick devour Kongsha as he thought that it was too dangerous. However, he eventually caved in because he knew there was no other choice. Be it his direct disciples or his clone, there was no one else who had the ability to stop Kongsha anymore. Even his greatest trump card, the Golden Page, had failed as well, so he allowed Little Chick to go ahead with it, but he also instructed Little Chick to stop as soon as it felt it was in danger. He thought that the latter would be fine with its extraordinarily powerful recovery ability. Yet, who could have thought that Kongsha would go so far as to sever it into many pieces before burning it to ashes? With eyes filled with killing intent, Zhongxian was just about to rush forward to pit his life against Kongsha when he felt someone holding him back. Right after, Wu Chen's anxious voice sounded, "Young master, purifying the aura of divinity is more important, or else Little Chick's sacrifice would have been in vain." It was as if a pail of ice water had been poured over Zhongxian. His killing intent remained unabated, but rationality had returned back to his thoughts. He immediately halted his actions. Indeed, with his current strength, even if he were to pit his life against Kongsha, it was impossible for him to achieve victory. There was a world of difference between the fighting prowess of a god and a semi-divinity. This wasn't something that could be bridged by mere skills or tenacity. There was only one route Zhongxian could take if he wanted to exact vengeance for Little Chick, and that was to purify the aura of divinity, assimilate it, and push his cultivation to the level of the gods too. As long as he succeeded, it shouldn't be too difficult for him to kill the other party. Taking a deep breath, Zhongxian resumed his lecture after a momentary pause. Battle technique is a means to channel and exerting one's strength at a point. Xiong xiong. The color of the flames on the altar grew brighter and brighter. As of this moment, there were at least 80,000 true immortals who had opened their hearts, but they were still a stretch off from success. How dare your tamed beast devour me whole? I'll return this humiliation 100-fold to you. Kong Shi's expression remained warped in anger even after slaying Little Chick. With a roar, he swung his sword toward Zhongxian. The weapon he had in hand was only a semi-divinity artifact, but in the hands of a god, it exerted strength far beyond that of ordinary semi-divinities. The sword qi that was produced through it stretched over a distance of 10 li, and its frightening sharpness made it seem as if the fabrics of space were as flimsy as a piece of paper. Protect our teacher. Zhao Ya and the others charged over agitatedly. Zhongxian's clone also quickly charged forward to protect the main body as well. Even though they had sustained significant injuries earlier, they had managed to make a full recovery through drinking bottles of chicken soup while Little Chick was holding down Kong Shi. Zhongxian's 11 direct disciples and his clone all had a semi-divinity artifact in hand, which added up to a total of 24 semi-divinities in total. Through their tight coordination, they formed a powerful collaboration formation. Even though the sword slash filled with Kong Shi's rage was powerful, they still managed to fend it off, albeit with some difficulty. Smash him to death. Zhongxian willed. Who? The golden page, which had lost its target earlier, locked its target onto Kong Shi and plummeted from the sky once again. The strength of the Library of Heaven's path had grown proportionately stronger to the might of the heavens of the azure. This also meant that the duration that the golden page could remain materialized had increased, allowing it to linger in the area even after a failed attack. With the golden page exerting its full might from above, the space around Kong Shi was forcefully sealed through the sheer pressure it emanated. Damn it! Kong Shi immediately tried the same move once more, activating his secret art to conceal his presence from the heavens to dodge the attack from the golden page. However, the clone suddenly rushed from behind to stab Kong Shi's back at this moment. Zhao Ya and the others quickly emulated the clone's actions, executing their strongest moves to harass Kong Shi. You fools! Are you trying to die? Kong Shi felt his goosebumps rising up. The golden page didn't discriminate between allies and enemies. It was a force that could crush even the gods, but Zhongxian's clone and direct disciples still charged right into the area of effect of the golden page without any hesitation. That was tantamount to suicide. Or even worse, they might even be planning on using themselves as a guiding beacon for the golden page to strike. In other words, they were planning on sacrificing themselves to bring him down. Kong Shi released a burst of sword qi which circled him like a ferocious dragon. He was intending to drive these fellows away so that he could hide securely away from the all-seeing eye of the heavens, but these fellows persistently stuck themselves to him. No matter how he tried to push them away, they would return and converge back in on him in the next instant. He couldn't escape at all. Hong long long. His surroundings swiftly grew darker and darker as the golden page approached him at a terrifying speed. It felt as if the entire weight of the heavens was falling down on him, sparking a hint of fear in the depths of his heart. Even if the golden page strikes me squarely, I still won't die that easily. Kong Shi harumphed coldly. Knowing that he wouldn't be able to shake off Zhongxian's direct disciples and his clone in time, he wrapped himself with a layer of sword qi to protect himself from the attacks from Zhao Ya and the others before dashing right toward the golden page. Boom! He collided face-on with the golden page, and the sword in his hand immediately shattered. The tremendous pressure crushing down on him caused fresh blood to spurt from his mouth and nose. But at the same time, he managed to stop the golden page in place. How frightening! Zhongxian's heart skipped a beat. The golden page had always been a trusty trump card that he could rely on to defeat his opponent regardless of the situation. As long as he brought it out, even the strongest individuals would be immediately flattened into a pancake. So, he thought that as long as he could stop Kong Shi from dodging, there should be a fair chance that he would be able to crush the latter to death. Yet, the latter actually wielded the strength to withstand it. It seemed like even the heavens of the azure was powerless against the gods. Young master, the aura of divinity has turned golden. Wu Chen suddenly exclaimed excitedly. Zhongxian turned his head over and saw the aura of divinity on the altar was emanating a brilliant golden glow. It looked the exact same as the one he had received back at the Hall of Gods. While his direct disciples, his clone, and the golden page were attacking Kongsha, he managed to align the wills of the 100,000 true immortals together, thus completing the ritual. Little chick, I shall exact vengeance for you. Without any hesitation, Zhongxian swiftly flitted over to the altar and grabbed the aura of divinity. Tzzzzzzzz. The aura of divinity slipped into his body through his pores, and it swiftly coursed through his meridians. If he had haphazardly absorbed the aura of divinity without a corresponding cultivation technique back then, there was a good chance that his body would blow up from the accumulation of energy. But right now, just recalling the sight of how little chick was sliced into bits and razed to ashes, he felt as if his heart was going to be ripped out. Flashbacks of the time he had spent with little chick crossed his mind. Back at the Sanctum of Sages, when he tagged along with Luo Xuanqing's group to find the Dongshu gourd, the latter abruptly dashed into his dantian and hid in there. That was the start of their bizarre relationship. There wasn't anything much that happened while they were at the master-teacher continent. He was unable to deal with the Dongshu gourd, and the latter spent all of its time lazing around and leeching off his dantian. It was only after coming did the azure did they start to spend more time together. Smacking his opponents to death from behind, stealing his pills, devouring the sword of his ally. All sorts of things happened between the two of them, and they did all sorts of things together too. Before he knew it, little chick had already taken on an irreplaceable position in his heart. Habit was truly a scary thing. Somehow, he felt like the days would simply carry on like that. They would continue being by each other's side, bickering with one another every now and then. I am a legendary beast who once ruled over the lands. Little chick's voice echoed in his mind. In fact, he could almost see the other party shaking its bottom gleefully as it guzzled immortal pills as if they cost nothing at all. We still haven't uncovered what kind of legendary beast you are yet. Zhongxian murmured quietly beneath his breath. All along, that fellow had been trying its best to achieve breakthroughs so that it could finally uncover its true identity. But till the very end, it never knew what it truly was. The tight bond of brothers go beyond life and death, Zhongxian muttered with reddened eyes. To look after each other's back and protect one another in the face of true danger, this was brotherhood. Boom. It was as if the aura of divinity in Zhongxian's body suddenly found an outlet. It flowed at the whims of Zhongxian's emotions, circulating on and on. At the same time, Zhongxian quickly immersed his consciousness into the great codex of spring and autumn to accelerate the process by 100-fold. Even so, the process of reaching godhood was simply too complicated. It represented the qualitative evolution of a life form. However, Zhongxian knew that this matter couldn't be hurried. So, he allowed the aura of divinity to flow along with his feelings and temper his physical body. I'll require at least a single day in order to reach godhood, Zhongxian estimated. Even though he had comprehended a higher cultivation technique and identified a feasible way of achieving a breakthrough, it would still take at least a single day for him to reach the level of the gods. It might seem a long period of time, but for a major breakthrough like this, it could already be considered to be extremely fast. One must know that Kongsha had cultivated for nearly an entire month after he acquired the aura of divinity before he managed to make a breakthrough. In comparison, Zhongxian's ability to make a breakthrough within a single day was unthinkable. There are 24 hours in a day, which translates to 1440 minutes. Even with the 100-fold multiplier from cultivating in the Great Codex of Spring and Autumn, I'll still need 14 minutes before I can make a complete breakthrough. Zhongxian clenched his fists tightly. I can only hope that I can buy that much time with the golden page. Even if the duration had been lowered down to 14 minutes, it was still far too long. He wouldn't be able to exert much strength within this 14 minutes. If Kongsha were to attempt something during this period of time, he would be completely helpless. Zhongxian turned to look at Kongsha, who was still suppressed under the weight golden page at the moment, and prayed that the golden page would somehow be able to buy him sufficient time for a breakthrough. Who? But barely after this thought surfaced in his mind, the golden page suddenly wavered a little before dissipating into thin air, as if it had never appeared before. The duration of materialization of the golden page had been increased after he came to the azure, but it still wasn't able to remain materialized for too long. You scoundrels! With the vanishing of the golden page, Kongsha finally turned his gaze toward Zhongxian. His entire arm was already rotting, and his other palm had been severely injured as well. Blood was dripping from his body. Even though he had managed to fend against the golden page and all of the trump cards which Zhongxian had prepared, he still ended up sustaining severe injuries in the midst of doing so. You might have succeeded in buying enough time to cleanse the aura of divinity and absorb it, but you have also depleted all of your cards too. You don't have any means of buying time anymore. On the other hand, all I require is a single breath to kill you. There's no way I'll be giving you any chances anymore. Kongsha spat menacingly as he glared at Zhongxian with cold eyes. The only reason why he hadn't killed Zhongxian so far was so as he could capture the latter alive and extract the heaven's imperfections from his body. Yet, this hesitation nearly cost him his life. That fellow was indeed an existence of the same level as that bastard. Even as a mere semi-divinity realm cultivator, that fellow was someone who couldn't be underestimated. He realized that he would have to kill that young man right here right now. If the battle were to drag out any longer, he would really lose control over the situation. Chapter 2099 Guardhood, You're right. Time is indeed not on my side. Even as he realized that Kongsha was prepared to kill him, Zhongxian did not display the slightest hint of fear. If I were to foolishly wait here for you to make a move against me, there's no way I would have enough time. However, I could always choose to hide, just like you. It won't be too late for me to exact vengeance when I make my breakthrough eventually. Hide. A cold glint flashed across Kongsha's eyes. Do you think that I will allow you to escape in my presence? With a wave of his hand, Kongsha began to seal the space around Zhongxian. Who? But at that very instant, Zhongxian suddenly vanished from the spot. At the same time, Wu Chen took out an ethereal token and placed a storage ring on it. With a resounding buzz, the storage ring disappeared from sight. A storage ring and an ethereal token? I see. Kongsha was initially stunned for a moment before bursting into laughter. It would indeed be possible to achieve spatial teleportation using such a method. However, you have neglected one important fact. I am the head of the Ethereal Hall, and I hold the authority to track down the movement of any item in the Ethereal Hall. He had been wondering what kind of ingenious plan Zhongxian had in mind to flee from him. Yet, it turned out to be such a meaningless and futile maneuver. The only reason cultivators were able to remain anonymous in the Ethereal Hall was because the Ethereal Hall allowed them to. Was the young man really so naive as to think that he, the head of the Ethereal Hall, would not be able to track down someone moving through it? He had thought that it would be a great deal of trouble to obtain the Library of Heaven's Path after Zhongxian reached the level of the gods, but it seemed like he had overestimated the latter's intelligence. It was just a change of battlefield. Humph. Did you think that I would allow you to escape? Paying no heed to the war happening all around him, Kongsha flicked his wrist and took out an ethereal token. His ethereal token was very different from what was distributed to the others. It was golden in color. Most likely, it was the token reserved specially for the Hallmaster's use. Holding tightly onto the token, a glint flashed across Kongsha's eyes. Of all places, you have chosen to head to the Ethereal Hall headquarters? Very well. It seems like you are courting death. After uncovering the location where Zhongxian had teleported, Kongsha was dazed for a moment before a cold sneer formed on his lips. Who? He took out a mirror and reflected the ethereal token against the mirror. A moment later, a majestic palace appeared in the reflection of the mirror. The palace was the Ethereal Hall headquarters located on the Azure Bridge. With his evanescent boots, he stepped into the mirror. A moment later, he was already standing right in front of the Ethereal Hall headquarters. As the adage goes, the most dangerous place is often the safest place. It wasn't a bad decision for you to choose to escape here, but it's unfortunate that you neglected one important detail. It's possible to track the location of others through the ethereal hall. This works in my favor as well. The interference of the heavens is limited here, so it'll be much more convenient for me to extract the heavens' imperfections from your body here. Kongsha chuckled softly as he released his spiritual perception into the surroundings. Through his earlier checks, he had found that Zhongxian had hidden in a folded space and placed the folded space in a storage ring. After that, the adolescent youth conducting the ritual had swiftly sold the storage ring through the ethereal hall, and it had been bought right after. The buyer had then made use of the teleportation formation embedded within the ethereal token to bring the storage ring over here. The chances were that Zhongxian was hidden in the ethereal hall headquarters. It was not a bad move at all. He never would have thought that Zhongxian would be so bold as to choose to hide in his home ground if not for the records of his movement. He isn't here. Kongsha swiftly scanned the entire palace with his spiritual perception, but other than a semi-divinity realm serpentine dragon trembling fearfully in one corner, he could not find any trace of Zhongxian. The serpentine dragon was likely the buyer that had purchased the storage ring that Zhongxian was hiding in. He would deal with that serpentine dragon in due course, but his priority was to capture Zhongxian before he was able to do anything. So, he scanned the palace once more with his spiritual perception, but the results were still the same. Frustrated, he raised his head, only to see a figure climbing up the pillars of the ethereal hall headquarters using just his physical strength. There you are. Kongsha's eyes lit up. At that moment, that figure was very close to the boundary between the ethereal hall and the Hall of Gods. Where do you think you are escaping to? Kongsha sneered as he soared up alongside the pillar. Semi-divinity realm cultivators had to scale the pillar by climbing it with their hands and feet, but those who had reached the level of the gods were spared this hassle. They were able to fly right up the pillar. Stop right there. Kongsha bellowed as he launched a palm strike to knock Zhongxian down. Zhongxian dared not stop. He swiftly climbed up the pillar with the dexterity of a monkey. Just as the palm strike was about to strike him, his body suddenly flickered before vanishing. He had finally passed through the boundary between the ethereal hall headquarters and the Hall of Gods. I see. You are thinking of biding your time in the Hall of Gods because you think that I'm unable to get in there. Ha ha ha. You really do impress me time and time again with your sharp wits, but it won't work. With a cold harumph, Kongsha passed through the boundary as well. The next instant, his entire surroundings suddenly flipped upside down. He should have been heading upward, but all of a sudden, he found himself heading downward instead. His center of gravity had been flipped. He had been there many times before, so he was not thrown off guard. He quickly drove his zhengqi and steadied himself before swiftly assessing his surroundings. Glancing downward, perhaps because the other party knew that he could not get away anymore and had resigned himself to his fate, he saw Zhongxian holding tightly onto the pillar, not escaping anymore. I didn't expect you to come chasing after me so quickly, Zhongxian remarked nonchalantly. There are many more things that are beyond your expectations. Since you have realized that it's impossible for you to escape anymore, why don't you just obediently hand the heavens' imperfections over? Kongsha smirked as he charged forward to strike Zhongxian. Before his palm strike even landed, the surrounding space froze, sealing off all possible routes of escape. Just as he was about to be killed, Zhongxian suddenly raised his palm and said, "There's something that I would like to." However, Kongsha's palm continued surging forward, only stopping when it was less than half a meter away from Zhongxian. He looked at the young man with eyes filled with ridicule. "Speak. I'll listen to your final words." "That would be much appreciated." Zhongxian heaved a sigh of relief. Then, he started counting down. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4. Huh. Kongsha was taken aback. Did this fellow lose his mind from fear? He had been wondering what kind of last words Zhongxian was going to utter when he started to do a countdown instead. Was he mentally ill or something? "What are you doing?" Kongsha bellowed furiously. "I'm not doing anything much. I'm just counting down. There's no need to get so agitated. Zhongxian replied with a smile before continuing on with his countdown. 3, 2, 1. When he finally counted down to the very last number, a smile as brilliant as the sun blossomed on his face. He stretched his back with a refreshed look on his face. Is that it? Since you are done with your last words, I hope that you are prepared to move on. Boom. Right after those words were spoken, a resounding explosion filled the air. As if there was a massive dragon circling his body, rumbling thunder roared from Zhongxian's body. A powerful aura surged into the void. At this point, the young man suddenly released his grip on the stone pillar. Yet, instead of falling endlessly into space, he was floating quietly in midair. Flight. Why you? You have managed to achieve a breakthrough? Kongsha could hardly believe his eyes. He had started cultivating right after he acquired the aura of divinity, but even so, it had taken him nearly an entire month before he was able to overcome the final hurdle. Even though the young man before him possessed a fragment of the heavens and was able to cultivate at an unprecedented rate, just like that be*****, it should not have been possible to achieve a breakthrough without at least an entire day of cultivation. It was precisely for this reason that he had not been too worried about the situation. As long as he could capture Zhongxian within a single day, the latter would not be able to pose a threat to him. Yet, how did the other party suddenly reach the level of the gods? All in all, it had only been 5 minutes since the other party consumed the aura of divinity and ran all the way there. Was it really possible for a person to make a breakthrough within just 5 minutes? Not even that be**** would be able to pull off something as ridiculous as this off. I don't believe it. There's no way this is true. Kongsha roared furiously as he charged forth and launched a palm strike. It's already too late. Zhongxian looked at Kongsha with killing intent flaring in his eyes. He was calm and rational, but the rage from witnessing the death of little Chick had not been quelled yet. He flicked his finger lightly. Peng! Kongsha had channeled his full strength into the palm strike, but as if a bolt of lightning, Zhongxian's finger flick still sent him flying back. Kongsha staggered for over several hundred meters before he was finally to regain his balance. Taking in large mouthfuls of air, he looked at the young man before him with a look of disbelief on his pale face. That single finger flick had not just dispelled his attack, it had nearly crushed his cultivation. Granted, he had already sustained significant injuries in the earlier battle, but the might of Zhongxian's attack had still surpassed his imagination. If the other party was able to sustain his might, he was not sure if he would really be able to achieve victory. Did he really manage to achieve a breakthrough? Kongsha clenched his fists tightly. Even up to this point, he was still unable to believe that he had been foiled by such a ridiculous turn of events. Gritting his teeth, he coldly spat, "So what if you have reached the level of the gods, too? I don't believe that you'll be able to master your powers so quickly." The powers of a god were vastly different from that of a semi-divinity. Familiarizing oneself with it would take a significant period of time. It was impossible to exert the full strength of a god right after achieving a breakthrough. Even though he had gone into seclusion for a month, the truth was that he had already reached the level of gods within 20 days. He had spent the last 10 days reinforcing his cultivation and familiarizing himself with the powers of the gods before reappearing. Even if Zhongxian had used some kind of secret art to accelerate the rate of his breakthrough, there was no way he would be able to familiarize himself with the powers of the gods so quickly. With such a thought in mind, Kongsha released a punch toward Zhongxian with a ferocious roar. In that instant, everything seemed to dim before Kongsha. It was as if the world was displaying its subservience to a superior being. A god exerting his full strength was not something to be made light of. In response, Zhongxian raised a single finger up. Who? The incredible momentum of Kongsha's punch was halted by a single finger. It was almost as if there was a metal barrier that stood in its place, preventing it from advancing any further. Crumble. Zhongxian flicked his finger once more. Pu. Pu. Kongsha was sent tumbling back dozens of li. The bones in his arm were fractured, and fresh blood spurted from his mouth. The sheer impact of this single move had nearly claimed his life. How is this possible? Kongsha murmured fearfully as he struggled to regain his balance. In this clash, he He realized that the other party had not just reached the level of the gods in terms of cultivation. The other party had also managed to familiarize himself with its powers, such that he was able to use it even more smoothly than him, and all of this was done within a few short minutes. This was impossible. Utterly impossible. With confusion reflected in his eyes, Kongsha fell into a daze. You're tuning in to the Celestial War YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.